So, okay, cool. So, thanks for being there, Kris.
You're welcome.
Today, obviously, we're going to talk about teaching and your experiences and your background and how you feel about the teaching environment. If we can start off a little bit about yourself, and then we'll move straight into obviously how things are. So, if you take it away, Kris.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to speak on kind of something that I have real life experience of, and teaching was something that I spent a large proportion of my life doing, my working life. I'd always been involved in education and the working of young people, whether that be from a perspective of youth work based to start off with. So it was more kind of working in a youth setting as opposed to an educational setting, youth provision. But it was some of that early work in youth provision and football coaching, which is actually something I kind of got back involved in much later down the line. Has given me that kind of foundation of kind of knowing what I believe the needs of young people were, how best to suit them. And yeah, so I had real varied experience of kind of education. And yeah, can speak to kind of working in the state school system, the private school system.
Yeah. So, you've worked across both, have you, private and public schools?
Yeah. So I've spent some time working. I've worked in a kind of something that was classified as, although I'm sure it's been kind of rebranded now as something called an EBD school, which was the acronym stands for emotional and behavioural dysfunctions. So that was a specialist unit for children in care, and that was actually one of my first teaching roles. Although at that point I wasn't a qualified teacher, I was very early into my kind of pursuit of teaching. That was really specialist. I've gone from that to kind of a state primary, funnily enough, a primary school that I actually attended as a kid, which kind of gave it some real core meaning for me. And because, I felt like I was working with children very much like myself, not all of which, but certainly from the same kind of community that I grew up in. If not kind of slightly different demographic. And then I spent a bit of time teaching in secondary school after being headhunted from from a school that I was teaching at to do a really specialised role, doing some work in transition, where I was approached by the head teacher directly because they had a unit in their academy which they called the transition class, which identified key students that might find the transition from primary into secondary challenging. And as a primary school teacher, that was something that they believed that I had the skills, plus the work that I'd done in special educational needs, that I would be well suited to that. So I spent kind of one academic year doing that. Taught in an international school in the Caribbean.
Okay.
That was, again, a really different experience. At kind of a very small international school with kind of less than 30 pupils, a very, very small island, which kind of most people couldn't even tell you how to pronounce if they saw it written down. It's called Kanawan.
That's not too bad.
One of the Grenadines. Yeah, it's well, to look at it and to read it, it's not as clear as it looks.
Fair enough.
But yeah, Kanawan is one of the Grenadine islands, part of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, has a population of it fluctuates between about 1,000 and 2,000 people. So a very small place. There's actually when I was on the island and working on the island, there wasn't actually a secondary school on the island at all. So there was a government primary, but there was no government secondary school. So the children, once they got to secondary school age, on that particular island, would have to leave and go and live on a neighbouring island or the mainland island to go and have a kind of secondary education. So I've had a few very varied educational experiences, and very different roles in each of those places.
So how long in total have you been teaching for? And obviously off the back of that, like, what was the age range you kind of spent most teaching during that period?
Do you know what? I personally feel I've been teaching for a very long time. And although by the letter of the law in terms of when I got my QTS, i.e. the piece of paper that makes me a qualified teacher, I can hold up and show somebody. That would only span probably about 16 years, maybe closer to 20 years. No, yeah, maybe 16, 17 years since I've had QTS. But I was teaching for more than a decade prior to that, whether I be a support assistant, whether I be a football coach. I started kind of coaching sport to the year sevens in my school when I was only in year 10 myself.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I ask that is because, I mean, time spent in that system, kind of, you fully understand. You are someone that can speak on this, whereas someone that's probably been in it a year, 2 years, or maybe even 5. Is that long enough to have a voice and say things? Because obviously we're going to talk about this a bit later on, but the reason why I asked that question was because some teachers kind of get burnt out very quickly. They get frustrated with the system within a few years, and they go in there kind of, they didn't meet their expectations, or kind of it wasn't what they hoped for in terms of teaching. Because a lot of teachers go into this with obviously, teaching and the best for the kids. And within a few years, because of the system, they get burnt out, they're very frustrated, and especially on obviously social media, you get a lot of teachers now kind of criticizing the system, the support wasn't there, which we'll get onto a bit more. But you've been there for 15 years plus. You understand it fully. It's not, you're not speaking on this subject lightly, and that's what I just wanted to address right from the beginning.
Yeah, well, to kind of echo what you're saying, yes. I mean, part of the education system and working in youth and working in schools, more than 20 years. And that's something I can definitely speak to, and actually part and parcel of kind of how and why I work differently now. Because the profession, when I came into it, and the demands of that profession were never easy. It was never an easy job. Even 20 years ago when I stepped into it, but it certainly hasn't gone in any other direction other than more and more and more challenging. So I can definitely see. I can see how the amount of time that people are spending in the profession is decreasing. That doesn't surprise me in the slightest. When I first started teaching in the primary school that I spoke about, which was my old primary school, there were still a few members of teaching staff that were there when I was a pupil. So they would have been there for a good 20, 25 years to have been able to be there by the time I came back as a member of staff. But within a very short period of time, many of those had been kind of moved on.
Yeah. So how long have you been away from the teaching environment?
I don't consider myself away from the teaching environment in any way, shape, or form. Now, I don't teach in primary school. I don't have a job teaching in a primary school, nor do I have a job teaching in a primary school, but I am still teaching. So yes, I'm doing kind of grassroots football coaching, although that's kind of one subject, I guess, if you're going to kind of be really specific about it. But I don't work for the school. They are a kind of almost a PTA-run kind of grassroots football team associated with a school, i.e. all the pupils or all the young people who go to that school. But for me, I still believe, with the skill set that I have, with the experience that I have, and what I bring to coaching, I very much do it from a kind of a teaching perspective, a teacher's perspective, as opposed to just a coach. The pedagogy is deep within me, so it comes out on the football pitch, whether that be in getting my under sixes to count, or getting them to think about some other kind of more complex things like kind of pre-performance routines and kind of stuff like that.
Over your time, like, what have you seen a significant change in how, when you started, to what the education system is now in general, like the state of teaching, schools, the environment? Have you seen a significant change? Or because as a point of a parent, especially because of social media, obviously I don't think it's the parents, I think it's more social media and what you see on news, what you hear, we're almost failing them. That's the general consensus on the stuff floating around.
Yeah.
What is the general state of schools? Just to kind of tell parents it is or it isn't, or you've seen it or you haven't seen it. Because obviously teachers have a different version, parents have a different version. The media doesn't help the situation when they don't understand the full picture of what's going on. So coming from a teacher, what is the state of like from when you started to what it is now?
Yeah. So yeah, I'd say that the state of education is it's constantly in flux. It's never steady. It's kind of obviously it's led by politics, and obviously whether that be whether that be red or blue, or the current state of affairs, it is heavily influenced by the political landscape and what's in vogue with regards to that. I've always found it really interesting that education ministers and somebody who could be appointed an education minister can have little or no experience of teaching, yet be a minister for education. You wouldn't, there aren't many fields of work, certainly a skilled profession like teaching, that you would get somebody to be a minister of that thing with no knowledge of actually what it means to be in a classroom or teach in a classroom. Least of all, if many of those ministers have had one form of education, which is kind of not reflective of the national picture. So hopefully I'm not speaking in riddles in that respect. If you're privately educated, you've only had a private education in your life, how it is that you can be a minister for education nationally.
Yeah, of course.
And have informed knowledge of what's required nationally, without just basing it on data, statistics, and Ofsted results. So that's one thing that I've always found quite interesting. Now, that's not to say that an education minister or education ministers or people who are kind of in administration of education have to come from a teaching background. But it's very much, same as anything. Immersion is really important. And I think if you are not immersed in the process and what it means to be standing in front of 30 children day in, day out, it's hard to kind of have a very informed opinion, one that I'm going to take quite seriously from a teacher.
So in general, would you say education has generally improved over your time, like the output, or is it kind of going down? What are you seeing like on the ground in the sense of speaking?
What I've seen on the ground is an increasing demand on teachers for what it is to be a teacher. I genuinely believe that the majority of people who go into education and go into teaching are doing so because they believe that there is value in the education of the custodians of the planet. Because effectively, that's what I believe teaching is. It is about us doing the best that we can as teachers to pass on the knowledge that we have learned in our life, within the parameters of the curriculum that we've been given. However, the rigors of that curriculum and how many hours you're supposed to spend doing each part of it, and the fact that everything is data driven, heavily data driven now. It's about kind of schools are judged on their Ofsted grades. Ofsteds are largely judged on data and results. And data and results come from assessments, and assessments aren't the most important thing about the education system. However, those things all kind of find the teaching profession in that constant loop of kind of going back to, okay, well, it's about data and it's about results. And I don't believe that's what education is about. I don't believe that's what our schools' jobs are to do. Yes, of course, we want children to leave school with strong literary skills, strong kind of numeric skills. But actually what I personally believe is more important is that actually we teach. these young people how to have strong interpersonal skills, because irrespective of their levels of literacy and numeracy and every other thing that we're supposed to squeeze into our 5.5, 6 hour days,
Yeah.
our young people do need to be able to interact with each other. And that's more important than anything. And I think the demands of the profession are putting less emphasis on those interpersonal skills and are more focused on the data.
Yeah. Okay.
Results.
I mean, we'll talk more about the Ofsted ratings and how that affects teachers and obviously head teachers a bit more in a minute. But so, what should parents know in terms of how teachers are supporting their children and what parents should be doing as well? Because from myself being a parent, it's almost like I send my kids to school. They come home and I'm like, what have you learnt today? What have you learnt today? And should I be pushing my kids to do more learning at home? Or should I be like, okay, I need to get them extra tutoring? Is that putting too much pressure on kids? What should, if a parent had to honestly tell a teacher, be like, look, they're in safe hands, we're following the system works, rely on it, you don't need to put too much stress on the kids. What should teachers be kind of like, if they could tell parents, be like, this is what's happening? Because obviously parents don't see behind the school what's happening, and obviously parents and teachers kind of don't know what's going at home. So for example, like if my daughter gets homework every week, it's not difficult homework, but there's a lot of parents kind of that fail to kind of push their kids or do that homework, whether it's time, whether it's stress, and they go to school and the homework's not being handed in. So what's going on? Some parent might think, oh, you're giving my student too much to do. And then obviously parents might be like, oh, school teachers aren't doing enough. So what information can you give? Like what's happening as soon as a kid comes into school, what's happening? And as soon as a kid leaves, what should parents know? Really, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's a really broad question, and I could really go off on a tangent on this kind of a question. Homework's a really interesting one, and maybe we can kind of circle back to that, or hopefully I can get this into my answer. But the truth of the matter is that from a parent's perspective, for me personally, the questions that I ask my children are more about kind of how their days are, and asking really interesting questions to kind of tease things out of them about their day. It's a lot of information. Every single day that your child is at school, they are absorbing a huge amount of information. Much of that comes in the form of kind of the content of their lessons, but kind of a really large percentage of that, in my personal opinion, comes from the interactions that they have with the people on their table, the dinner staff at lunchtime, the playground supervisors. That information and those interactions are as important as the content of each lesson. So that whole kind of just because I'm a teacher, I don't have a kind of a magic wand, and the children of teachers are some of the most let me use the right word here. I feel that my children have it really hard because their dad is and was, but I still consider myself a teacher. However, so the expectation on them, not just from me and their mother, but from the other teachers know that your dad used to be a teacher, or your dad is a teacher. So they already look at my child and all my children in a certain way. So one of the things that I do when my children come home is I just ask them a really simple question, not what have you learned today, but something like, what was the funniest thing that happened at school today? Can you tell me something you didn't know that you've learned today? Is there something that you found out about today that you already knew and you put your hand up? Maybe you gave the answer, but you didn't know the answer. Sorry, you knew the answer, but you didn't get a chance to give the answer. Almost more direct with the questions, as opposed to general and generic about how was your day? Because the truth of the matter is, it's something we ask our partners. At the end of the day, how was your day? You're not expecting a warts and all breakdown of the whole day when you ask your partner. yeah, how was your day?
Yeah.
So that expectation of us to kind of get that from our children when really they haven't even digested all of the information yet. They've kind of, after spending a day at work, the last thing you want to do is kind of recount your whole day at work, right?
Yeah.
It's the same for children. So, yeah, the questions that you ask your children, I think, are important. And fundamentally, what I am hoping for when I see my children at the end of the day, or when I interact with my children, is their happiness. Because, childhood is fleeting.
Yeah.
We've all had one. Some of us remember ours better than others. Some of us have fonder memory of our childhood than others. But once it's gone, it's gone. And what I really hope for in my child's day at school, of course, is for them to be learning. There's, of course, for them to kind of acquire more information. But I think I have a somewhat unique opinion on this because I sat on both sides of the desk, so to speak, as a teacher and now as a parent, is that I don't expect all of the learning that occurs for my child to come from me. In fact, I have kind of an expectation that I am as much a facilitator in my child's education as the class teacher is, because my child is just one of 15 or 30, depending on how big your class sizes are. How much of that teacher can my child realistically expect to get? And how much of that should I realistically expect the teacher be able to apply to my child? Because, of course, my child is more important to me than any other child in that classroom. But guess what? Every parent thinks that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was going to talk about this a bit later on, but obviously the question, obviously, regarding like what teachers should tell parents, what parents kind of should understand what's going on behind closed doors. And the reason why I ask that, because that's more of a personal question from me, and I'll give you an example. Might not be the best example, but this is where that question came from. So when my daughter was 4, I actually introduced some tutoring to her from outside. Now, a lot of people are going to say, look, that's too young. What are you doing? But my aim was that, yes, I do have time. I've been blessed that I have a bit more time than other parents to spend with my daughter. So I introduced her to certain learning apps, learning books, just wipe away books so she can get handwriting down numbers. That's obviously time I had to give to her.
Yeah.
And this was probably reception, so there was no kind of need to be doing that. Reception is still quite early ages. They're just still kind of finding their feet. Nothing's been pushed on them. But I thought, let's start early. If she gets her mistakes out of the way now, there's not stress when she reaches kind of year 1, year 2, year 3, kind of those levels. So I started introducing tutoring to her, and the way I did that was I just approached a local tutor, and we just kind of met up in the local library. Two things out of that was, I said, look, to the tutor, there's no aims, there's no goals. I just wanted to have fun with learning. Make whatever you teach her fun as possible. I don't care how she's done at the end of the day. It's just to keep that going, that look, this is going to be introduced into your life, and education is fun. It's not something to be scared of. And the second thing was doing in the library was, the kid knows the library exists. She's surrounded by books. I'm trying to, in the back of her mind, kind of almost say books are better than just being out and about and just messing about with friends. And now she kind of loves books. She loves reading. She's got it in her head that going to a toy shop isn't everything. We go to the bookshop regularly as well. So that kind of setting that seed early, essentially what I'm trying to say, was something I wanted to achieve. And what I saw was when I was there, I went there and I saw another parent bring their kid into the library, and this kid didn't want to be there because she was behind on her homework and it was quite loud, so I could hear what the parent was saying. They were not happy with the fact that they've literally not done any of their homework. This was a lot older kid, by the way, probably been about 8, 9, it could be wrong. But they were academically falling behind and the parent was not happy. She saw that I was bringing my kid in for tutoring at such a young age, and she started asking me questions. She's like, how much does she charge? How is she like? Is she a good teacher? Gave all the information. I said, look, there it is. She's there. You can speak to her afterwards. She said so on. But anyway, but in the back of my head, all I could think was, you're forcing education on your kid when they've already given up on it in a state. They're in an environment, whether it's from school or home, they just don't like education. They hate it because she did not want to be there. She was screaming, she was kicking. She's like, I don't want to go, I want to go out, I want to leave, I don't want to do this. That's all you could hear in the whole library. So something in, whether it's a home environment or school environment, has led to this kid absolutely hating education or doing any sort of work. And now the parent was bringing him into an environment where tutoring is almost forced. So if the education side has already failed, is tutoring really going to help? They already hate it, and now the parents bringing them in to force the tutoring. If you know, it's you're forcing something they've already kind of established that they don't like. And in the back of my head, I was like, every parent, in my opinion, this is my opinion, might not be a popular one, but in my opinion, every parent should be not relying so much on a school. Understand a school is there to build a foundation, but then you should also be developing an environment where education is a fun thing, is a good thing, without the expectations. Because schools obviously come with grades, certain achievements, you know, you have to achieve. We'll come into the Ofsteds. Obviously, there's a something happens if your kid achieves, right? So it results in obviously the school doing well, the teachers obviously doing well. Again, Ofsted report that leads to higher scores. But the environment at home, there's no scoring. There's no A's, B's. It's just you're doing well, you're enjoying what you're doing, you're reading books, and the parents are proud as well. So you're almost leading to the environment, both sides. The school is happy, the parents happy. That's where this question came from, because that was my own decision to do that from my own experience in education. Because I didn't have the education that obviously some people do, private education or very well education, and I kind of reflected on that a bit as I got older, and I didn't want that for my kids. So I was like, I'm going to start early, but not forced. And that's where this question came from. What? Because I could easily say it, because like I said, I have the time to give to my kids and not other parents do. But I would still kind of encourage parents to not rely so much on the school, and kind of educate your kids as at home as much as you possibly can. Not forced, but as much as you can, and make it a fun. If you don't make education fun, kids are never going to enjoy it. They spend the majority of their lives, the first part of their lives, like you said, you know, youth is fleeting. If they spend that whole time hating education, what was the point? And this is why I asked that question, like what should parents be telling, or asking teachers, and what should teachers be telling parents? And what I'm trying to say is, should a teacher say, look, you shouldn't rely solely on the school to completely cover every educational aspect out there, and your kid's going to be the brightest? I know it might be a harsh thing to say, but from my point of view, I think parents should be putting in more if they can. Obviously, I understand time and what they're doing, but my kid, I'm not bragging, I don't like to do that, but again, blessed with the time I had. I'm seeing the fruits of what I put in, to the efforts I put in, you know, and I wish that every parent could do this, but obviously I know a lot of people can't. So again, what should teachers, coming from a teacher, is that a right way of doing something, or should you be like, no, you can't say that, because obviously parents don't have the time, and schools should be doing a bit more, and obviously personal life at home should be your own personal time. Education should be kept in school, and the school should be doing more, in a sense.
Yeah, well, I kind of somewhat spoke to this, but I guess to drill down on my answer and be a little bit more specific about it, for me, it is a 50-50 split. Okay, and the fruits of your labour are kind of panning out in respect of kind of you giving that opportunity for your child to have that early exposure to education, and have that early exposure to education, so that, not with any aspiration because you want to get into a particular school, or you're looking at a grammar school or any of those things. From what you're saying to me and what you've said to me, is that you've done that because you want her to have a positive experience in education, and then when it gets to the point where education gets formal, you would like her to kind of come in with some kind of knowledge, and kind of go, oh yeah, I know these letters, or I know the sounds that those digraphs make, and that's something you've chosen to do to give her that grounding, or in that grounding, which is excellent. You've also spoken to kind of having the time, and the capacity and desire to do that for your child. And I think that, again, you know, if what I'm saying is accurate, i.e. that it's 50% down to a parent, 50% down to the school, and when I say the school, I don't just mean your kid's class teacher, because your child's class teacher is only that teacher for that 1 year.
Yeah.
Therefore, they are not responsible for the education of your child other than in that year. And actually, they're not exclusively responsible for the teaching of that your child, because they might have a separate PE teacher. And what relationship they have with PE or music, for example, is going to be dependent on their interactions with that teacher. So I would say that 50-50 split is a thing. However, as you spoke to, not everybody has that capacity. That is the truth. Yeah. So, children who need more support, in the context of somebody like the young man that you kind of spoke to, who's in the library with his parent, straight away, I want to applaud that parent for making that time to take their child to the library, no more or less so than yourself for doing it much earlier. And there's a reason why that parent took that child to the library to do the homework, even if it wasn't necessarily the right environment to do it, because there was the pressure of other eyes. There was maybe he doesn't like books, and kind of actually being in that kind of an environment only reminds him of the fact that he finds school very challenging. These are just hypotheticals, because I don't actually know the circumstance of that particular situation. But the parent has made that effort, made that time to sit down with their child and do that. To try and do that work, even if it was a difficult, even if you could, in your experience or in your kind of viewing, you could see that wasn't something that was kind of it wasn't received by that child on that day as a thanks, mum. Thank you for taking me to the library. Thank you for helping me get this done, because this is something that the school are expecting me to do. Thank you for sitting beside me. The truth of the matter is, however well you raise your child, you're never going to kind of get the appreciation that you deserve as a parent. But the truth of the matter is, the fact that that parent has chosen to do so means that they are trying to. However, it's there are a few key points here. Okay, some children are going to arrive at school already behind. Not necessarily just because of ability, but sometimes actually because of their circumstances. And that can be a situation where they're brought up in an environment where aren't books at home. There isn't a quiet space to work. There isn't necessarily an adult available to help with their homework. There are key points. There are also some other things there that are kind of another layer, and actually even more challenging layer of kind of why some children might require more at home than they're going to get from school. And that might be, or more from school, than they get from home. Like, for example, the fact that they're dealing with trauma. We don't know what's going on in most households outside of our own. There might be a kind of a food insecurity. You're not eating breakfast or in the morning, yet going to school. And there are measures that a lot of schools are putting in place, breakfast clubs, etc., to try and deal with some of those things that they don't really have the control over. But they know that kind of children who are hungry can't focus. It might be a situation of children in unstable housing or have even caring responsibilities. Some of these young people that I've worked with, are full-time carers of their parents for whatever reasons. So these children are actually needing more and more and more from school, but actually are often getting the same or even less because of actually the resources that are available to schools now. So I don't think it's a case of teachers not noticing which children need extra support. Actually, I think teachers are very, very, very good at noticing who needs extra support. But the truth of the matter is there isn't necessarily the resources. In fact, in most cases, there aren't resources to provide adequately for the children who need extra. So, as much as you want to fill those gaps, you can't be, as a teacher, you can't be their parent as well. As much as you have, I very much saw every child I ever taught as my own. I'd like to believe that I treated every single young person I worked with as if they were my own, because that was the duty of care that I had by taking in somebody's child for the duration of a day. Now, also nowadays, you're not just expected to kind of take that on, because I believe that's something that's very important. I think the child feels that. If you take them on as your own, they will feel that, and you get them more invested in what it is that you're trying to get them to do and learn, and how to interact with each other. But you're expected to be the social worker and identify needs of these children and be aware of the things that you're kind of noticing with your own eyes, whether that be being unkept, whether that being hungry, whether that being the kind of things that you would expect a social worker to do, which kind of you are the first point of call before something like that even gets involved. And there's a lot of training and time put into teachers to kind of to identify some things that might kind of identify children who need a bit more support. Or therapists even. You might be, as a teacher, you might be the only stable adult in that child's life. And the responsibility of that is really quite a heavy emotional kind of labor, especially if you care deeply about young people, which I genuinely believe most teachers do. And that works the other way around. It could be the other way around, where you're watching an extremely talented child in the classroom underachieving because of circumstances beyond their control, and that's another thing to consider.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you, and I think you've answered the question I had in terms of like what teachers should be telling parents is like, yes, you do look after them, you want the best for them, but your attention is divided between how many students, and it's absolutely stressful that you cannot almost like be a parent to every child because they're all working at different levels. It's absolutely difficult. You can only do what you can in that given time. Like you said, the teacher's only there for starters from 9 till 3, whatever the time period is, depending on what year you're in. And then you change yearly. That relationship can't be built where you see, developing over a number of years, as you would a parent or a long-term caregiver. You see them and then you can fill in the gaps, where they fall short. That's what you're asking teachers to do. So yeah, you kind of answered it where you said, look, the teachers are doing their best. They do care about all the kids. They want the best for their kids. But where I think we might have a little bit of a disagreement, which is fine, that's the whole point of discussions, is I understand that when people have certain circumstances where they are kind of like, obviously, like you said, financial issues at home, or, getting difficult getting food, so they send them to breakfast clubs in the morning. Your child, especially as a parent, going to the library is something free. Libraries, I've seen so many libraries close down over the years since I was young. My old library where I was like, I'm in my 40s now, where I used to live, one of the libraries has closed down there, and it's like those resources are free. I don't go down to the library like after my 9 to 5 or during the week. I go down on a weekend. Now, I understand some parents do work on the weekends. I understand that, but then obviously you must have time somewhere else. Then I do understand, look, especially if you're the only kind of provider in the household, some people are working kind of like 7 days a week. There are a few exceptions, and I'm not making excuses for those people. I understand. I have people in my own family who are literally working every hour of the day. They don't even have time for their kids. Those exceptions exist, and I do understand support for them is needed. But I'm talking more broadly in terms of I am seeing parents who we've had conversations with, and they, after reception or year one, I don't remember when it was, we've had a couple of kids listed as their ADHD or something. And it's like, they're only 4 or 5. Isn't that just energy of bouncing around that you need to redirect? But they've taken them to someone to list them as, oh, they've got ADHD, they're having difficulties learning. And it's like, have you tried yet? And these are working class parents that are around us. And obviously I don't want to name and list or shame any of them. But that was a very quick assumption to make, or something to label them with at such a young age. My kids bounce off the wall all the time. Sometimes, it's very difficult for me as well to get them to concentrate. But I'm not listing them and labeling them that they have difficulties. I'm just trying to redirect that energy into somewhere else. And that's why I'm trying to hint at, like, should parents be putting a bit more kind of effort? And like I said, I do agree there are some circumstances, there are difficulties. They're the exception. But it seems like it's more and more of where parents just don't have time, or they don't want to put in the time. It just seems like that to me. And is that something you're seeing as well? Because if that wasn't the case, why is there so much more stress on the teachers? Because I have a few teachers like I know, and they're just being bombarded with the amount of stress they have. So it's almost like the parents are offloading their responsibilities to the teachers, and that's why I'm siding more on the side of teachers, because I do have those
Yeah.
conversations with both sides. And like I said, it's not something you need to agree with me on, but it's what I'm seeing and making my own assumptions on. And I am seeing that parents are not putting as much effort as they could do, especially the ones that are able to do it. Like take them to the libraries, read books with them, spend time. It's more like I want to spend time on myself and let the schools deal with my kids. And that, I mean, you've answered the first side. No, teachers are doing the best they can with the time they have, but then it leaves that side of the parents. Are you seeing that? I mean, with your parents' evenings or the conversations that you have with other parents, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't disagree with anything you're saying. I do think that there is I feel that a young person is only going to do as well as the environment that you put them in is going to be conducive to. Now, that doesn't mean that an extremely talented child in an environment that is less than nurturing towards their education means that they are not going to achieve, because that's just not the case in my experience. There are children who are in difficult circumstances outside of school who go on to achieve a huge amount academically, and then consequentially beyond what they learn academically, because they have that internal drive to do so. They want to succeed. They are kind of outside of themselves. They are outside of themselves enough to kind of look at their circumstances and want better for themselves. But we're talking about a child here, and that is unusual for a child to have that internal drive.
Yeah, but that's the point, though, isn't it? Because besides those rare occasions where a child has a drive because of the environment or the situation, the parents should be doing more. Isn't that what we're trying to agree on? Because you can't just let the kid do whatever and hope that they're going to be one of those bright, successful kids. Because even my kid, they're achieving now, it doesn't mean they're going to be achieving later. So I'm trying to be involved as much as possible to kind of keep them on track. And even if that's up until 16 and beyond, what they do after that, I don't know. I mean, they could completely derail. But as long as I'm in control of it, because if you lose them at a young age, I'm talking about purely in terms of education, if you lose them early on, it becomes way more difficult later on. And I don't want parents blaming somebody else for that.
No.
And that's what I don't want.
And I think that there is, and I genuinely do, like I said, from both sides of the desk, I genuinely do believe that there isn't enough accountability on the part of parents, generally speaking, with regards to when things aren't going well in education. There is this, what are the school doing?
Yeah, and that's the angle I'm coming from.
And I've absolutely seen that, and I've actually seen that kind of. You only got to go. Maybe this will help, okay? And I guess we're going to get into this later because you've kind of spoke to it without kind of using it as a kind of direct question. The additional needs that we are seeing in classrooms and the frequency of diagnosed additional needs in the classroom is something that is increasing at an exponential level. The amount of children that are requiring statements or kind of EHCP plans and all the other kind of terminologies which change constantly because the goalposts are being moved. But the diagnosis and assessment of additional needs in the classroom are becoming more and more widespread. Now there are all manners of different schools of thought as to why this is the case, whether that be the amount of screen time a child's having, whether that be the way that child is parented, the amount of exercise that child's getting, the amount of pollution in that child's vicinity. All of these, there are lots of different kind of schools of thought as to why it is that our children are demonstrating things, that we would consider outside of normal behavior patterns. But like you are suggesting, that isn't something the school have the ability to do much with in terms of resourcing wise, because as the number of children who are getting diagnoses are increasing, the budget to support those young people is not increasing. It's just not. Therefore, the onus is going to have to first and foremost go back to the parents to kind of go, okay, we are seeing certain things that mean that your child is requiring a little bit more support with this, that, and the other. They're finding it a little bit more difficult to focus, and et cetera, et cetera. But the consistency of what that child needs fundamentally has to come from home and then be reaffirmed by school. It's not a case of, this is we need a diagnosis, we need more support now. Fix my child. So I do think that, but then again, it works both ways. Yes, that's consistency and that support and making sure the child has got kind of access to good food and good exercise and good stimulation outside of the classroom, so that they can kind of learn how to kind of focus, being able to kind of actually get their wriggles and all the kind of physical things that they need to get out of their body, so that when it's time to sit down and lock in and focus, they can do so. Those things can't just be, it can't just happen in a classroom. So yeah, I think that I agree. I think that there is, there's an expectation that school is not going to change your child in and of itself. And I think that is our responsibility as parents to support the school, because the teachers know what your children need academically. And actually kind of emotionally and kind of, in terms of their nurture. And if if we are able to use the knowledge of the teachers to kind of, say, what do you think might help? Be vulnerable as a parent, and kind of say, look, I can see that my child's finding these things difficult. What kind of things can I be doing to make this easier?
Yeah. I mean, we're going to touch on this a bit more in terms of the questions regarding obviously parenting responsibilities and stuff. But if we talk about the stresses that teachers kind of are under, because first of all, parents need to understand it's not just a 9 to 3 or 9 to 5 job, right? There's all sorts of prep work going into. I mean, some of you guys, I'm assuming you're working way into the night or evenings at the schools, marking work, prepping for the next day. You're getting in early to prep the lessons, the classes. So it's almost like, you're working beyond the 8 hours. That's stress on its own, besides looking after the kids and all being individual running around. Explain some of those stresses for the parents who don't know what an actual teacher is doing, besides welcoming them in, setting some lessons and then going home. I mean, because that is a massive stress. And like I said, I've got teachers in the family, so I already know this. So hence why I'm not too critical of teachers or holding them up to certain standards, because I know what they're already doing. But for parents who don't, what kind of stresses are a teacher looking at right from the get-go in the morning to kind of when they leave?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. So I'm going to start answering that question by kind of talking about what, from the perspective of what I think parents should know about schools today, okay? And I think that kind of one of the good foundations for starting that is to kind of say that there's clearly a gap, unless you've done somebody's job, you have no idea what that job is, okay? So there is always going to be a gap between what happens in the classroom on a day-to-day basis, and what the parents actually see. And that's something that kind of in my time as a teacher, I actually worked very hard against that gap, because like I said, it's impossible, in the same way that I spoke about politicians not knowing, not having an informed opinion on what it is to be work in education, yet to be a policy maker in education. That for me is an issue. But with regards to kind of parents, what happens in the classroom, what parents actually see, I made a real effort to bring my parents into the classroom as often as possible. Now, admittedly, when children were reception age, and when I taught reception, i.e. when children were, a lot of parents were giving me their children for the first time, it was a lot easier to get those parents into the classroom because they kind of want to see what their children are doing. They've been used to spending a lot of time with their children, whether they went to nursery or not. They've been used to having their children present with them a lot. So then when you first get them in full-time school, the parents are kind of keen on, at least a small percentage of parents are keen on coming in and being like reading parents and being a parent who might come in and read with kids. Not necessarily, in fact, the way that I applied it, in fact, I would never let a parent read with their own child. If you were a parent reader and you were kind of coming in, I had 3-4 parents coming in 3 or 4 days a week, but they wouldn't read with their own child. Because you can do that at home. Why are you coming to school to read with your own child?
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, one of the reasons why I got them to do that was because I wanted them to, I wanted the other children to see this parent doesn't just care about their own child, they care about you. And they care about you because you are sharing a child with their child, you're sharing a classroom with their child. And when you do that, you create a better bond for those pupils in that classroom. Now, that was something that, again, I applied because it was important to me. But it also helped me bridge that gap between actually what parents see in a classroom, because they were actually seeing it, as opposed to just hearing about it from their child at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So I think reducing that gap between what happens, what they see, and what kind of actually happens is something that I think as teachers we can make more effort to do. But admittedly, like I said, once the kids get older, there is so much more drive just to get through everything every day. You haven't got time to be coordinating timetables for parents to come in and do stuff. So it happens less as the kids get older. That doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. I think it should happen more. But the other thing is that I think that there is a real gap from parents' perspective to actually know how much teachers genuinely care and actually how much they are constrained by the systems that they work in, and that actually most teachers go to school very early, more than an hour before the school day starts, because it is required in terms of printing out resources, in terms of marking books, in terms of making sure pencils are sharpened, etc., etc. You are required to be there much earlier than before that school bell rings. And of course, in order to get through the marking of every single lesson of every single class that you've done throughout that day, and then have it ready with feedback for every child to respond to the following day, so that you are actually seeing that progress. That work, homework, assessment load is continuous. It never stops. The hours required to actually do your job are obscene, and unless you're in the role and unless you're in the profession, you'd have no idea.
Yeah, because I think most parents would just be like 9 to 5, go home, and then spend time with their kids. Teachers don't do that. They're there from probably 6, 7 in the morning. They're probably not getting home till 8 if they're marking homework, if I'm correct.
Yeah, every single day. Because again, a conscientious teacher, and I believe that most teachers are conscientious. There are policies that most schools have which require books to be marked every single day. That is the policy of the school, because it's the policy of the school, and they're trying to keep to whatever outstanding that they are trying to achieve. And I say outstanding not because I'm using outstanding as them wanting to be outstanding, as opposed to the definition by kind of Ofsted. But if the book isn't marked, how does a child know if they've done it right?
Yeah.
So if you don't mark the book, if you don't mark every book every day, that child is not getting that feedback. So that workload is extreme, to say the least.
Yeah.
And then, so the other thing that I was going to say is about communication challenges between home and school. If that is the nature of your role as a teacher, from whatever time you get there to whatever time you leave, how much communication can you possibly have between yourself as a teacher and what's happening and what's going on at home? And there are real challenges to that. I would love to. You can't debrief with every parent every single day. It happens. One of the reasons why most schools have these really kind of convoluted kind of start and finishes to every day is because every parent kind of, you might have something that you want to communicate to your class teacher, your child's teacher, but guess what? So do 30 other people.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the challenges with actually communication between the teacher and each parent of every child in that classroom, again, make it more challenging. And it's not like that teacher doesn't want to have that conversation with at the end of the day, but they've also got an after school club to run before they can actually mark the books.
Yeah.
There's some things like, there are bits that I kind of say, like I said, what I think parents should know from their perspective. But in terms of the teacher stresses, the common stresses, like I said, it's about marking and a data entry, huge amount. It's about the amount of kind of expectation of meeting certain standards, whether that be internal, i.e. from your line manager, i.e. your key stage coordinator or whatever. There is constant scrutiny, not just from Ofsted, but constant scrutiny from internal and external of your ability to do your job. And then the teacher stresses also. We've spoken about kind of children with additional needs, but general behaviour management, getting your children to actually, getting your class to actually function as a class, to work together, to become friends, to deal with stuff that might not have been dealt with previously. There might be something that happened in year one that they never really resolved, and therefore you've got certain children who don't have those interactions. When do you have the time to work through that stuff?
Yeah.
So it's not just about performance metrics and league tables. It's about actually kind of getting these young people to be able to kind of interact and go through whatever conflict resolution they need to go through, because a fallout in the playground, to you or I as adults isn't a big deal, but children hold on to stuff. They really, really do. And that has an impact on the function of that class and the interactions of those pupils. So those kind of the challenges, including the kind of dichotomy of the parent expectation, whether on top of the kind of institutional constraints of the environment you're working with and the school that you're working in. There are significant stresses. Safeguarding responsibilities. Your things that you often, by the nature of the safeguarding policies that school have in place, which are very, very, very tight nowadays because of terrible cases of kind of children being kind of mistreated and things not being spotted, means that you're constantly looking at certain things and second guessing something, and do I have to report this? Should I report this? Therefore, the work-life balance that you have as a teacher, or lack of it, is a big thing. It is a really, really big thing. And it, like I said, when I first started teaching, there were people who taught in the school when I was a pupil in it. And they did not last long. I'd say 2 years most before they were no longer working. Now, towards the end of my teaching career, towards the end of my time, it was not abnormal for somebody to come into education from university, with this idealistic kind of idea of what they were going to do, what they were going to achieve, how they were going to be as a teacher, and literally be out of the profession and be like, I cannot do this anymore within 3 years. And I think that some of those teacher stresses, some of those pressures are the reason why they the time spent in this profession is reducing. And I do have some theories, as to kind of that being by design. I actually think that's.
I
think the nature of the role kind of the nature and the demands of the role, certainly over the years have become so extreme that I don't think the profession has adapted to work against teachers not having the legs to be able to do this profession for any more than a decade, unless they are exceptional and extremely internally resilient themselves and don't take everything on like they could, because they care about these kids, and if they can see the system isn't really working for these kids, how long can you work in a system if you feel it isn't working?
One of the stresses, we touched on it there, was obviously the behavior and discipline of students. I mean, that must put an enormous amount of pressure on teachers as well, how they deal with students who are a bit rowdy in the class. I mean, how do you even handle or even approach handling discipline in the classes? Because I think it's near impossible when you have students who are not behaving. What is a teacher supposed to do? How do you address those situations? Like, how do you tell parents your kid's not behaving in class? How does that happen? How do you approach it? How do you deal with it? Because I can imagine that not being an easy subject for most teachers.
Yeah, I mean, student behaviour trends kind of are very much kind of polarized, I feel, and you can split them into kind of home influences and school influences and the conflict between the two. So the home influences, i.e., what is happening within a child's home, that is kind of making them feel like the behaviour that they demonstrate in the classroom is acceptable in that environment. And it's a really difficult one to kind of talk about kind of really candidly, because people are going to have an opinion on anything that you say or that I say right now.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is, things like screen time and attention spans are definitely kind of factors to consider. Okay. Parenting styles and the ability to hold boundaries with your children, again, outside of school, is going to have an impact on how a child is able to interact in the classroom. If you have a particular parenting style that is very gentle parenting, for want of a kind of a trendy term, as much as you'd love to be you'd like to bring that into your teaching, right? Everybody would like to be this really gentle, softly spoken Miss Honey in the classroom. But that's not necessarily going to be the way to get 30 children's attention.
Yeah.
So therefore, having certain boundaries, whether you use countdowns, whether you use clapping rhythms, whether you use whatever brilliant skills that these teachers have, you still need to have a style and a boundary that allows you to kind of pull things together when you need to. And if, like I said, if the parenting styles and the boundaries at home are quite different from those in a school, the young people are going to find it difficult to kind of necessarily just go, oh, right, no, I have to act this way now because I'm in this environment. And then, like I said, I've spoken about the socioeconomic pressures and the stability of the household outside of school. Those home influences kind of are going to have an impact on
I think it's more from my point of view.
Behavior. However, the school influence, what we have to as teachers do is kind of use the peer pressure, i.e., if you can get the majority of your classroom to fall in line with whatever kind of policies that you have in place within your classroom. One of the things that I did as a teacher very clearly, at the very beginning, at the end of the year, as a marker, is get classroom rules, but get classroom rules that are drawn up by the children. So that it's like, look, we are going to decide the rules for our classroom. This classroom doesn't belong to me, Mr. Parker. This classroom belongs to us. I'm the facilitator of the learning. How is it you would like me to help you all learn? And if you kind of go with that approach, then the peer pressure and the group dynamic behavior can have an impact on the school's culture and the expectations throughout the school. But again, that's down to you as an individual, as a teacher, to kind of go, right, where am I putting these boundaries in? And and now if I stick to them, then we can have a situation where the dynamics of the classroom can work. And if somebody, you'd hope that it's not more than one or two, because it's not very easy for a revolt. It's not very hard for a revolt to occur in a classroom, and it only takes 2 or 3 children in a classroom of 30 to be like, I am not doing this. They are going to, if 2 or 3 children decide that they are going to stop the learning happening, there is nothing you can do as a teacher to stop that.
I would think that's the main thing I was trying to highlight is obviously not what we do, because that's kind of a subject that is going to get a lot of people kind of having input in regarding disciplines at home. What can teachers do at school to kind of correct that misbehavior? But it's just the stress. It's not easy. It adds a lot more stress onto you, because there's not much teachers can do.
What can you do?
Like you said, besides kind of reiterate kind of look, this is what you should be doing, these are the rules of the school, please follow them. But yeah, like you said, one or two people misbehaving, if the rules don't apply to them, it's going to affect the other kids. And again, that just needs to, I think, a bit more responsibility on the parents to know how their kids are. Because, and this is me as a parent, and I'll probably get a lot of critic for this, but just because you think your kid is an angel in the home doesn't mean that's how they're behaving outside. So just be a bit more kind of wary of how your kid is, who they're hanging around with. I mean, perfect example of this is my daughter behaves here, but I know when she goes to her family's houses or her relatives or anyone else, friends, how rowdy she is. She's bouncing off the walls, she's a bit aggressive, she only wants to play her games, and I've got to rein her back in. If my perception was how she is in the house is that my child is perfect elsewhere and that's final, that's wrong as a parent. I need to know how she's behaving in other environments. I need to keep an eye on that. And that's why I said, look, the stresses of obviously the child misbehaving have an effect on other people, effect on their friends, the people around them, and especially on teachers. Because a teacher is the person that can't actually do anything, but they want the best for that kid because they're also teaching a group of people. I would say parents do need to kind of keep an eye on their kids, what they're doing, not just in front of them, because a kid will be at their best behavior in front of you because you're a figure of authority. But how are they behaving when you're not looking? That's, because that is then what they're doing outside in other environments, especially the school as well. And I see it in my little one. I know she messes about. I know she gets rowdy. I know she forces certain games that other kids don't want to play. And if they don't play them, she gets moody. But I tell her, you can't behave like this. It's an environment where everyone needs to play together. You need to share. You're not going to make friends if you're the only one setting the rules of what you want to do. It doesn't work like that. That's not how the real world works. It's a bit of give and take. Obviously, she's only 6 or 7, but setting those boundaries, setting those rules early, and a parent kind of acknowledging, look, this is how my kid behaves, and it can affect schools, can affect teachers. We just need to be a bit more aware of that. And that's, like I said, there's more of a stress kind of a thing that it puts on teachers. And yeah, from your point of view, what can you do? It's not much.
Yeah, no, not much. But I come from a school of thought. Look, I grew up in kind of a largely kind of working class kind of community in North Kensington. However, the area now is very much gentrified. Yet, that kind of abject poverty still exists. There are plenty of food banks in North Kensington, as well as multi-million-pound houses. Okay. But with regards to kind of student behavior, I think that, having that context and having that experience of kind of teaching in the primary school that you went to as a kid, it kind of gave me a real kind of internal acknowledgement of, certain young people that I used to have in my classroom who would climb underneath tables and throw pencils and do some of those things that children do. Even 45 years ago, before there was kind of diagnosis of certain kind of needs. Okay. But I've always maintained kind of this philosophy and this belief that children kind of who are acting out aren't bad children. Okay. There's no such thing as a bad kid.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
What they're dealing with is the chaos of their own mind. It might be neglect, it might be hunger, it might be trauma. But the behavior of a child is always communication, even if it's not the default form of communication that is most useful to me as a teacher. Okay, so addressing the root causes, of the behavior, because it's the behavior that's bad, not the child. Okay, so therefore, if you address the root causes of the behavior, that requires a huge wraparound of support that a teacher. One teacher or a teacher who luckily has a teaching assistant for that child because of the behavior that they can demonstrate, the wraparound support that's required for that child is wraparound. It requires everybody. So, punitive punishment and loss of certain privileges, or even kind of, or even the opposite, which I've also seen, i.e., certain acting out behavior, which then gets the child out of the classroom and goes to, kick a football around in the playground because they've kicked off in the classroom. Therefore, they know that if they kick off, they'll be pulled out of the classroom and they can go kick football around for 10 minutes and then they can go sit back on the desk. I've seen children use and manipulate some of those things that are supposed to help them in the same way. So punitive punishment, or kind of, measures that are overly kind of soft that can be manipulated also don't work. What you actually have to address is the underlying issues. That is the reality. You have to speak to those children. You have to actually start getting them to acknowledge what the expectations are of them, why it is they're actually in that building, and what it is that their function is. The teacher's job is to teach, and the pupil's job is to learn. And the teacher will do everything they possibly can to facilitate them being able to do their job, but there is also a responsibility on that particular child and the wraparound support in place for that child, be it from the parents, carers, or whatever other kind of services might be involved. It is a whole wraparound kind of support system. And if those pieces aren't working together for the needs of those children, then you're going to have the challenges you're going to have.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we can agree on that. I mean, consistency is the main thing. I mean, whatever standards you're having or don't have at home is going to reflect outside of that, and vice versa. The rules and standards outside are going to bring them home. And if there's no consistency, where are they? They're going to have issues, and those issues are going to come out somewhere, whether it's in school, whether it's at home, or whether it's out and about. Those issues are going to flare up and cause serious consequences. So that's definitely something that needs to be addressed. On how we address it, I don't know, because with everything we have in terms of like what can teachers actually do to kind of correct certain behaviors is quite limited, I'm assuming. How do parents address misbehavior at home is now getting more and more restricted in terms of discipline at home. Obviously, Asian parents should know this more than any other group. Everyone knows that, striking your kids 10, 20, maybe 30 years ago was fine. It was common, to discipline them, because that's how they knew to do it. Back home, India, it still happens now. It still happens in some schools. Obviously, they've banned it kind of on
and in the Caribbean and Africa.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't want to address this, but it happens. Yeah. I mean, whether that's a positive result or a negative result on the outcome, it's there. It's a tool to be used by them, and obviously the parent needs to judge that. Here, obviously in the UK, where literally you cannot do anything to discipline your kid. I mean, raising your voice is now becoming an issue to your kids. You can't, because it affects them. And it's like, I had the same mindset. I'm never going to shout. I mean, every parent does when they become a new parent. I'm never going to shout out my child. He's going to be an angel. I'm going to get them. But there are times where they test you. They literally do break you. No matter how well your intentions are, they do. Yeah. And it's like, how do you deal with this? It's such a difficult subject to kind of address. Because you
quite gently kind of make the point that look, what was acceptable behavior in my childhood and what you could get away with is quite different to nowadays. And what measures you were able to use as a parent with regards to kind of discipline and kind of being able to give your child a smack or even raise your voice, these things have been dictated to us now as parents as acceptable and not acceptable. Yet actually the kind of the skills, we have not been given other skills other than kind of what we pick up from other parents and other teachers and other parents and teachers and YouTube videos or TikToks or Instagram reels about how to actually do it. Okay, if we can't do what our parents used to do to us, what are we supposed to do now?
Yeah, exactly.
There isn't a manual.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not like, don't get me wrong, those discipline methods that were used like 10, 20 years ago, that doesn't mean they were effective. They were just available as a tool. It does not mean they were effective then and they should be effective now. That's not what we're talking about. No. But they were available as a tool for the most extreme of situations. And that's what they did. But now all those tools are gone. And like I said, even now, raising your voice, shouting at the kids, it's all being stripped away from parents. So what is left to deal with, which is such a sensitive topic, and it's such a difficult thing, because again, teachers don't have the time to be doing this. Teachers' role is to be teaching. Their kids come in, they've got to teach to the best of their ability. Kids have got to go home, and then the parents got to spend time with them. And if their kids are rowdy non-stop, and you can't even have a communication with the kids properly, what do you do? If the only method is to communicate, but the kids don't want to know or hear about it, what's left? What tools are left for people to deal with? And I know that I'm not expecting you to answer the question, but this is more of a wider topic that we should discuss at a later point. But every tool like we have, if the kid doesn't want to listen, what do you do? What's left? And we're just going round in circles and having talks and debates, and it's getting more and more difficult, especially from what I'm seeing. It's just what do kids do? You know, you take them out, like, for example, most boys that have issues or they show kind of tendency to be a bit more rowdy, the solution is from what the parents I talk to is take them to martial arts, take them to a sports that's more aggressive, and let that be their outlet. But then it's like most parents can't afford that. That's time now again set somewhere else. You're adding more pressure on the parent to do something that they may not have time or the finances to do it, because martial art clubs aren't cheap. I mean, you must have seen the price of after school clubs. They don't have time. It's an hour. They're not local, all teams. So you're asking parents to do something that they might not have time to do or put in the effort or financial. So the system isn't really helping either side, because they're saying, yeah, take the kids to after school clubs, that be their outlook. But if the parents don't have time or the financial needs to do it, what have you solved? You haven't actually solved anything, because the clubs aren't free. So it's quite difficult to kind of fix that type of behavior. But yeah, it's just more of a stress that people need to understand, that teachers need to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I think, there are two different distinct goals with regards to children's ability to engage or making our children listen, especially in the context of a classroom. And what I mean by two different goals, you want them to be kind of motivated enough to actually want to do things themselves. I.e. to genuinely care, to be curious, to internalize their learning, so getting them to engage, But then there's the compliance element of it, i.e. in order for that to happen, they might need to sit still, be quiet, complete a task once you've given it to them. But then if they can't do the first thing, i.e. sit still or be quiet, they might not understand the task, therefore they can't complete the task. So you've got those two core challenges at the beginning. But yeah, with regards to kind of the hows and the whys, i.e. why children disengage, why it is that you've got that gap between, their ability to do so and kind of a chosen, or what some might believe to be a chosen desire to kind of go, no, I'm not going to do this, is there's a reason. Like I said, it's the behavior is communication. You get that relevance. I can kind of list a load of different things to kind of explain what the root cause is as to why children disengage. Is it the relevance gap, i.e., why am I learning this? Why is it important? If they're spending a lot of time, for example, and I don't want to blame social media, but if they're spending a lot of time watching somebody like Mr. Beast making obscene amounts of money, they're going to have that whole, they're going to be further away from, they're going to have that whole, when will I ever use this? Why do I need to know this? Why do I need to recall all this information? And they are legitimate questions for, certainly children by the time they get towards the end of primary school right now, because the truth of the matter is that the things that we are getting them to learn by rote, i.e. to know kind of off the top of their head, they've all got devices. Not all, but most of them have devices, or at least have access to devices, even in the library, to give them the answers to everything that we're teaching them anyway. So why is it so important? Why do I need to know this?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's where the education system needs to pivot a little bit and be like, okay, you need to know this because actually you need to know how to find out the information.
Yeah.
It's not just a case of asking Google or using an AI tool, because that's not necessarily going to give you the right answer. You're relying on a piece of technology that isn't necessarily going to be accurate. But then, so there's that. So there's the relevance gap. Then there's this whole learned helplessness, which is something that I kind of I believe is really important, where kids kind of decided, if they've consistently demonstrated that they find school difficult, their behavior is bad or whatever, they start to disengage, and they do so to protect their ego, so it's easier to kind of be like, listen, I'm not going to try, because if I don't try, then it hurts a lot less than I'm trying and I'm failing. So that's there's a learned helplessness there that is a key factor in kind of why kids might disengage in school. And then you can go down and then you can start talking about dopamine hits and social media, gaming, YouTube, all these things give instant gratification. You get that dopamine hit constantly. Whereas learning in a school environment requires real delayed gratification. You have got to sit there for 10, 15 minutes to complete something.
That's one of the things I actually had a conversation with a few people.
And it requires sustained effort. So your brain is literally, kind of not even you're not getting that dopamine hit, because also if the thing that you're sitting down and you're going to have to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes focusing on, and you can see everybody around you with their head down, cracking on with it, and you are finding this thing difficult for whatever reason, that delayed gratification, which might not even give you that gratification at the end, means that your brain's not wired to that anymore, because you're used to the instant dopamine of the social media, of the gaming, of the YouTube. And your brain has literally been rewired for short-term rewards.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's
so why put in the work?
That's one of the conversations I had with actually quite a few parents. Is like when you sit and you put, especially at a young age, when you put iPads and certain tablets and phones and games in front of kids, the reward and stars and gems bouncing off certain games, like as soon as they click a button, that's instant gratification. There's no way a parent can keep up with that. You're not going to sit there every time they get a question right or an answer right, that you're going to put stickers on their books or jump in joy. No. You can't. It's very taxing for the parent. Whereas games, tablets, TV, it's instant. And when a kid realizes, like you said, when a task takes 15, 20 minutes and they don't get that gratification or they failed a task, they're going to disconnect. And that's going to lead to all sorts of behaviors, or not listening, not paying attention anymore, because they know they're not getting that sense of gratification anymore. And I agree with you on that side of things.
And the brain, and the truth of the matter is, it's very easy for us to blame all the kind of woes of the modern world on social media and the use of devices, right?
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is, we're only able to have this conversation because of some of that technology.
Exactly.
Right? So we can complain. We can complain about children wanting instant or kind of being fixated with screens, but they're only using the devices we put in their hands.
Yeah.
Right. So if they are dependent on those instant gratification dopamine hits, because it's only because we put those devices in their hands. We have to accept responsibility that that's us. And that kind of, because we've got laundry to do or cooking to do or cleaning to do or another job, we're sitting here on our, a lot of parents who, when their children finish school, they're going back to their computers and working now, while their children are there. And because they're in meetings or doing whatever they need to do, it's much easier to give your child a screen and be like, go, let me get on with what I need to get on with. There's no judgment on that. Like, the truth of the matter is that happens. No matter how good a parent you want to be and you aspire on being, sometimes you're going to do something that for you that allows you to do what you need to do. And these devices have kind of given us a bit of a get out.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
They've become a co-parent, but the truth of the matter is, actually, they're not giving our children what they need. And actually, what it is that you're choosing, once you give a device to a child, what it is that they're doing on their device is really important, and not becoming dependent on those things that are giving those constant
I mean,
competing dopamine hits.
the only thing you can say in certain, because like you said, parents are working from home, they need to join meetings where you do need the kid to be distracted for a certain amount of time. I mean, I agree with you on that side, and there's nothing we can do because I'm in a similar situation. So is my wife in a similar situation. We have to put the TV on. I'm not beyond that, and not many people are beyond that. So that happens. But all we can do is be like, look, be mindful of what they are watching, what they are doing on the device, and where you kind of are doing like outside of means, like you said, for example, if they're doing the laundry or they're doing something that requires your full attention and not your child's attention kind of to distract you, let them be bored. Being bored is fine.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
I said this to my children just this weekend. I'm like, you have no idea what boredom is.
Exactly.
I said, you trust me, you at no point in your life have you ever been bored.
Yeah.
Because I'm telling you, all the things that you have access to right now without having to ask for my permission to go and use means that you have no reason for being bored. Being bored is a choice in your world, in my children's what I would consider modern privilege has, we would make patterns in the carpet when I was a kid. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I remember that. I do that. Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean? Now, if I said this to my child just this weekend, I'm like, bored? Tell you what, when you're making patterns in the carpet to entertain yourself, then you can talk to me about boredom, because that's what I did as a child sometimes.
Yeah. I think anyone our age or back from like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, know exactly what you're talking about. But this is my point. Like, it's okay for your kid to be bored, and the side effect of being bored is they're going to constantly pester you, which I understand. But then if you leave it long enough, they will start to kind of go off and do things by themselves.
They will find something
but
to do.
There is
absolutely,
there is that phase of, yes, they are going to pester you because they've been so kind of accustomed to tablets, TV, and something that's going to give them instant gratification, that unfortunately because of those choices they're going to keep bugging you for those. But if you leave it long enough, they will stop.
But that's where and I don't mean to interrupt you. That's where you have to be a parent. That's where the real parenting is. Like being like, just because your child has asked you a fourth time in a row does not mean you're going to give them what it is that they want. No, go and find something to do. We have puzzles in the house. We have books in the house. We have Lego in the house. We have, that room, is full of things that you can do. So I do not want to hear anything about boredom. And actually being honest with your child and being like, look, you're telling me you're bored because there's actually something in particular that you want that I'm going to say no to. So let's have that conversation. You are not going to get that thing. And there's a reason why you're not going to get that thing. And be honest about it and have that conversation. And a 2 to 5 minute conversation, which is interrupting your laundry or your work call, to actually have that conversation and be like, I'm sorry, speak to people in your meeting who may or may not have children and be like, I'm really sorry. I just need to deal with something for a few minutes. That is, for me, that is important. That is more important. Having that 5 minute conversation, and putting whatever it is that you're doing, however important it is, on pause for 5 minutes, so you can have that conversation and be like, this is what's going to happen. This is what you need to do. I do not want you to ask me again.
I mean,
for something that I've already very clearly, said, this is the reason why you're not going to have it. But you have to have those conversations, because if you have those conversations, you don't have to have them all the time.
It will wean off. It will wean off because they'll start to understand. I mean, the one thing. I mean, we'll move on to other questions because obviously, we need to kind of get onto the other points of this podcast. But I mean, the only one thing I want to add to this is it's very different. Obviously, doing that to younger kids versus teenagers. And what I mean by that is if you say go do something, it's good to be bored to a younger kid, obviously they'll kind of get used to it and they'll go do things around the house and they'll find things to do, like you said, draw in the carpet or do something. But teenagers, that's where you've got to be a bit more careful, because they will just leave the house and go to their friend's house to play the games or get that instant gratification where you've stopped that. So there is that understanding. You've got to be careful of when you do it and where you do it. And obviously dealing with teenagers, and that's slightly different because they have the means to leave and go do something else outside, which you are no longer in control of. So that's where I've just got to be a bit careful and reiterate that, we can't just be like, being bored and go do something else is always going to work. To a certain age it will work, But then beyond that, it's a bit of a grey area, because I think that's where you just need to be a bit more careful.
Yeah, I do think it becomes more challenging. This idea of parenting becoming easier as your kids get older. I completely disagree with it. I don't think it becomes easier. I think it becomes more challenging because the truth is your children have more and more agency as they get older. They have more agency to kind of make decisions for themselves that you're probably not even aware of.
Yeah.
And being honest enough to kind of say this, say this to ourselves is important. My personal feeling on that, without you asking me a direct question, is that I think that's why having your children engaged in certain things, whether that be the learning of musical instruments or a sport or any kind of an after-school activity, art, knitting, gymnastics, whatever it is, getting your children involved in stuff at a young age is critical, because at a certain point, one of those things will stick with your child and they will become the thing that they use to entertain themselves. And if that thing is a mobile phone, because you've given your child access to a mobile phone from a smartphone, not just a mobile phone.
Yeah.
You've given your child access to a smartphone at 8 years old. You've got zero chance of taking that away at 14.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas actually, if you don't introduce, if you can resist the peer pressures and all of that of putting a device like that into your child's hands at a young age. And you give them, and you give them the football, and you take them to their music classes or their ballet or whatever it is that you're able to do with whatever limitations you have financially and or time constraints wise, they will fill their time with those things as opposed to
I've heard this saying.
devices.
I've heard this saying kind of like from a lot of professionals where they say, "Don't be your kid's friend," and I kind of agree to that, but only partly agree to that. I'd say kind of you need to guide them as opposed to being their friend. A friend's role is something completely different, but to guide them in terms of saying, look, stay away from the phone, but then you have to substitute that with something, and that's your role as a parent to guide them what that is. What is that you're filling that gap with? So, I took my daughter to football. She didn't like football. I took her to tennis. She didn't like tennis. I took her to swimming. She enjoys swimming. I take her to some STEM classes. I'm exploring these opportunities with her. And when she finds something she likes, I'm going to let her go with it. It's the guidance side of it. So I agree with you don't necessarily need to be their best friend where you need to be with them like 24/7 so you know what they're exactly doing and they need to come to you for everything. But it doesn't mean you stop guiding them towards what you think they should be doing, because that way you don't need to worry. And like you said, develop these skills like after school clubs, whether it be football, whether it be any type of sport or anything. You at least guided them into a right path, as opposed to I'm not giving you X, Y, and Z, go find something else to do. So it's just that sentiment of like, don't be your kid's friend is partly true. As long as you're filling it with something that you kind of can do with them or understand or relate to in some way, whether you're not doing it yourself, I think does help, because you can talk to them. If they have nothing to talk to you about, you're making that gap and divide bigger between yourself and the kid. And then they have nothing to talk to you about. You're kind of just there as a caregiver and nothing else, for food, drink, somewhere to sleep, and that's it. And that applies mostly to older people. I mean, coming back to obviously, being bored and kids can walk out, you still need to be there in some sense, a way, and still to understand what they're doing so you can talk and interact with them as they get older. So a bit difficult, but that's my thought on that. One of the other things I wanted to teach before we move on in terms of stresses was the Ofsted reports. Now, briefly, what are the Ofsted reports about, and what are they there for those who don't know?
Sorry, what you read the question for me?
Ofsted reports. So what are they there for, and what do they entail? Briefly, so for those who don't know what the Ofsted reports are.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Do you want a really honest do you want my personal opinion, or do you want kind of generally speaking why it is there is a purpose, the official purpose?
I would like a bit of both, because if someone wants to know generally what it is, I think they can just go online. I think most parents know, especially parents who take their kids. That's the first thing they look at is the school's Ofsted report. Even before they begun looking, is they'll start talking about the Ofsted report of the school. So I think generally most people know what they are, but it's more for those people who don't yet know. But I would like your honest opinion on that, because most parents can look online what they are, or talk to other parents about what they are.
Absolutely. All right. This could be a long section.
Well, we're trying.
But
well,
hopefully it'll be useful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So take it away.
Hopefully it'll be useful. Okay. So the official purpose of Ofsted, is about kind of ensuring quality and consistency across schools. Yeah. So it's about making sure that the standard of education has a quality assurance throughout kind of the country nationally. Therefore, it makes schools accountable for their performance. It provides parents with information so that they can make informed choices about where they necessarily want to send their children, i.e., I want to send my child to that school because that one's outstanding, or that school requires improvement. Maybe we shouldn't look at that one. That's part of the reason. But it's also therefore by design of being kind of graded, it's also there to drive improvement. So it allows the schools to then identify their weaknesses and know what they need to do to improve. Safeguarding is critical. Okay, so it checks on the welfare and the safety standards of schools. And actually, safeguarding has been, you can be an outstanding school because you're getting the data, you're getting the results, you're getting, the parent kind of questionnaire. All the parents are really happy. They're saying their children are happy, so you get everything outstanding. Yet you haven't got an adequate bullying policy in your paperwork. And therefore, you're not safeguarding children. Therefore, you can go from being outstanding to actually being a failing school. So safeguarding it trumps everything, and I think that's important because it is our duty of care to take care of these children first and foremost. So it is about promoting excellence and sharing best practice on a broader scale. How the actual process works is there's an inspection. So the school are given a notice period. They typically get kind of 1 day's notice now. Never, when I first started teaching, there was no notice at all, actually. They would just come in, whereas now schools typically get a day's notice. And no notice inspections only really occur if there's an outstanding safeguarding concern, and the school will just turn up because something, they've got a number of reports about something safeguarding related, and they'll just turn up. An inspection is 2 days for a standard inspection. Usually a team of 2 to 4 inspectors, depending on the size of the school. And what they're looking at is lesson observations, where they kind of see what's happening in the classroom. They don't tend to grade individual lessons anymore. So they're just kind of popping in for a few minutes and looking at what's going on. They look at the kids' work in their books. They look at the data on achievement and progress. That's what else they're looking at there. It's about personal development and opportunities, kind of outside of the classroom. They look at the leadership and the leadership structure of the school, who's in place, what experience they have, etc., etc. They look at the safeguarding policies, as I've mentioned, and then they do interviews with staff, students, governors, and parents. And then they are judged either as outstanding, grade 1, good, grade 2, requires improvement, which is grade 3, and inadequate, which is grade 4, which may lead to special measures.
Okay.
So that's effectively the synopsis of kind of Ofsted.
Okay, and how long do they have any chance to kind of improve and then reevaluate, or is it just that one visit and then you're given a grade based on that one visit?
So like I said, it usually happens in the space of 2 days for a standard inspection. The report is given back to the school, but after their 2 days. And you're not really given, in the interviews that you have, the head teacher will sit down and have a meeting with the inspectors. And I believe, I'm not a head teacher, so I've never been in one of those meetings. I've actually kind of managed to avoid, despite having a huge experience in teaching, I managed to avoid senior leadership for personal reasons. Because, it wasn't something I was interested in. I didn't think it was the best use of my skill set. Therefore, I had never been involved in an Ofsted meeting with the Ofsted inspectors, but I believe that you are given the opportunity alongside your the head teacher, alongside maybe one or two other members of senior leadership, have the opportunity to kind of have a discussion prior to a judgment being given, so that they can kind of make their case.
So there's no like, oh look, we've seen X, Y, and Z. You've got maybe if you fix these, or a week to fix it, or 2 weeks, or even like a month sometimes, depending on what the issues they've raised. We'll come back in a month's time. If you're improved, we'll give you what we think it should be. It's just literally there and then. No time to fix, no opportunity to fix.
No.
Okay.
No, so it's then and there. You're given a day's notice. I'd really like to tell you actually what the reality of Ofsted is, as opposed to kind of, I've given you a really, the process and what Ofsted is, just so that anybody listening to this can understand what that process is.
Yeah. And who are the...
I can give you a warts and all reality to what Ofsted actually does, in my opinion.
If you can, because obviously that's what we're here to talk about. So if you can.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, effectively, the reality from my perspective as a teacher is of what Ofsted actually does. And there are positives and negatives. So when it works well, it identifies genuinely failing schools, i.e. safeguarding issues are core, serious poor management kind of structures and systems are exposed. It can prevent dangerous or incompetent practices if their school aren't able to demonstrate certain pieces of legislation, paperwork, evidence of when they've dealt with. It's like when you're in an interview, when you're asked in an interview, tell me when you've had a challenge in a workplace and how you dealt with it. School, it's effectively the same things happening in an Ofsted. It's a very these things should be able to be demonstrated with policies and procedures, and okay, this is what's happening. We've got these children with these needs. This is how we're dealing with it. This is how we're supporting them. And obviously, schools that are schools that are actually not meeting the needs of children in by the parameters of Ofsted inspection are forced to improve. That's what the kind of an inadequate grading and therefore a special measures is given. And there are systems that are put in place if a school is failing and requires improvement or is inadequate that kind of are put in place to support those schools. That's some reality. So you've got the external accountability, i.e. it prevents, the whole process prevents complacency. It forces schools to maintain standards, et cetera, and it gives parents some objective information about, what the school is like. Therefore, it validates the good practice. So outstanding boosts everybody's kind of rating, and everybody feels great about themselves. You get a good recognition, and you, if you are an outstanding school, are often encouraged to pair with schools that haven't got that kind of rating, so that you can share best practice. And they're things that are part of the system in reality. The problematic side, and this is actually the reality for most schools in my experience, is that it's high stakes terror. And what I mean by high stakes terror is that the grade you are given determines everything from that point onwards. The school's reputation and the parents' opinions on the school based on just a 2-day inspection, which seems pretty strong. Staff job security, obviously that generally goes down to the head in most cases. Poor Ofsted results, kind of you'd expect the way the hierarchy works that the head teachers are the ones that are kind of the most accountable. But a lot of teaching jobs and pay scales are now kind of linked to kind of success and results and data, and therefore if you go from being an outstanding to getting good, that might be kind of something that's used against a teacher to then decide, well, you don't get your incremental pay rise because actually your class didn't make this much improvement to sub-levels of progress each term, or whatever it is that school's expectations might be. It becomes an issue for staff recruitment. Nobody wants to work in a school that requires improvement, which means actually a school that requires improvement needs better teachers. Nobody wants to go and work in, sorry, somebody's calling me from outside.
Yeah.
Right. Where was I? So for example, if a school requires improvement, you're going to want to bring some good teachers in. However, what good teachers are going to sacrifice their own professional integrity by kind of stepping into a school that requires improvement. I'd like to believe I'd go into a school that requires improvement because, I'm a great teacher and I want to go and teach in a school that requires great teachers. But not everybody thinks like that.
Yeah.
People might have aspirations to climb up the ladder and doing it in a school that requires improvement. It's going to be harder. That's the reality. So that's the reality of
Is there any financial kind of like issue that arise from Ofsted reports, like less funding or stuff like that?
Yeah, well, schools get their fund mainly, and from a layman or somewhat from an informed position, I will say to you that, of course, schools are bums on seats, right? The more bums on seats, the more money that school receives. Yeah, there's pupil premiums, i.e. children who've got additional needs get a little bit more money per child, but therefore what they require in terms of support, etc., may require extra staffing, means that cost gets absorbed. In fact, it doesn't actually even cover the cost of that pupil premium that you get for each child. So effectively, if you are a school at capacity, you're getting as much money as you can through the door. If you're a school who hasn't got full capacity and you've got space available, you're not getting what you should be getting. Therefore, you're gonna be financially at disadvantage as well. Outstanding schools, again, are schools that kind of tend to have more after school clubs, more activities going on, and those things might or might not generate an income for the school. Most of school clubs require payment, but again, what a parent is paying for their child's after school club probably doesn't cover the costs of actually running that club.
Yeah.
So it's not like schools are making a huge amount of money from running after school provision. It's as much as which is why a lot of schools actually don't pay teachers for after school clubs, because they've managed to kind of get that into their contracts that if you come and teach at the school, you need to run an after school club within your kind of paid hours. That's not uncommon.
Yeah. Okay.
The problematic sides of Ofsted can carry on. Career prospects. In some cases, school survival. How many different schools that used to be local authority schools are now have become academies? So the academization of schools is largely down to failing schools in the eyes of Ofsted. Yet the academy system, which runs even more so like a business than the state schools system, has its own challenges. These things create anxiety amongst staff. Performance theatre is what I like to use to describe it, i.e., we can perform enough Ofsted up here as opposed to genuine teaching.
I mean, the reason why
and then the gaming of the system rather than authentic improvement of a school.
Yeah. I mean,
so and what we're looking at is 2 days of judgment, 2 days to judge a year's work.
Yeah, exactly.
And seeing what 20 minutes of any teacher's practice or bad luck timing, i.e. somebody to kind of step into a very difficult situation that the school don't particularly deal with very well because it's a stressful situation, that can destroy a school's reputation very quickly.
Yeah.
Or one piece of safeguarding paperwork being in error can trigger an inadequate result. So kind of...
So this kind of goes on to Ruth Perry. I don't know if you saw that in the last, I believe it was last year. Teacher, was it the head teacher who committed suicide? Very sensitive subject, so I don't want to go over the details of it too much. If people want to know what happened with Ruth Perry, she was a head teacher, and as a result of the Ofsted report, she committed suicide because of the results. Don't want to go too much into the details. You can read about those online. It's publicly available. Other people talking about it in much more detail than I will. But my question to you is, what kind of stress or pressure does the Ofsted report put on somebody that they feel like they have to commit suicide? I mean, it's insane that a report, a judgment on your school would lead to something like this. What's the mindset or stress that it puts on you to think that this is all your sole responsibility and it was your fault to go down that path? Because that must be immense.
Yeah, I mean, The Ruth Perry case is heartbreaking, and it truly did reveal the darkest side of Ofsted's impact and what kind of an impact Ofsted result can have on one person in particular. And yeah, it's widely known that she was a head teacher of a school, that had previously been rated as outstanding. But what happened in this particular case, without kind of going into too much detail, was that they've gone from being outstanding to inadequate.
So that's literally, for those people who don't know, right from the top to straight down to the bottom in one report.
Yeah.
And that was in the what's the time duration of those Ofsted reports? Is it yearly, every 3 years, 4 years?
2 years. So it depends on where you are. It depends on how well you're doing. So my feeling on it, apparently it's meant to be every 2 years. Okay. However, if you're an outstanding school and once you become outstanding and you continually get out good results, you become less watched. Is my personal experience. Because if you become an outstanding school and then your data continues to suggest that you're outstanding and your data is constantly uploaded to the system, it becomes less. You become slightly out of the
out of the focus, essentially.
Out of the focus, exactly, of Ofsted, which in itself is a little bit of a contentious point for me personally. But yeah, they were an outstanding school who'd kind of gone down to inadequate. And the rating, I believe, from my reading of this case, was due to the safeguarding record keeping and procedural failures. So it wasn't kind of down to a particular situation. It wasn't down to a failing or because of children were unsafe. Although the inadequate ruling was given due to the record keeping with regards to safeguarding procedural failures. So I think this came down to kind of things like incomplete paperwork, missing DLs on DBS references or something like that. Maybe what was the other things? Procedural oversights with regards to how safeguarding was documented. But again, to give some context, which I think is really important, from a professional perspective for me to give, no child came to any harm that I'm aware of. No actual safeguarding incidents had been mishandled. Therefore, that was, it wasn't, that was the reason why they went from one to another. All of the failures were administrative and bureaucratic. So they weren't failures to protect the kids. In particular, they were just kind of the administration. And actually, from what I remember and what I read, that schools were kind of were safe. They were caring. They were well run, and that was in the parents. The parent that came back from the parents, and certainly from what I've read of kind of Ruth Perry since
that's why I didn't want to.
She was described as dedicated, conscientious, and deeply caring.
That's why I don't want to touch too much on the case specific, because I read it briefly. And I haven't gone into all the details of the causation of that. Like, I don't know if there were other factors besides obviously what we discussed, but that's why I want to talk more about how can an Ofsted report have such an impact on an individual that the only option they had was to commit suicide, which is just absolutely appalling. I mean, no one should be put under that sort of pressure, especially like you said, it was more of an administrative record keeping. No actual failures where children were kind of put in danger or anything like that. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard because, for somebody to kind of take their own life, some things have got to be, untenable, and it's something that nobody, least of all myself, could possibly even to begin to understand how bad you've got to feel on the inside to get to that point, But I know from my perspective, for what it's worth, your life's work being invalidated overnight is something that I don't think anybody can kind of put. If you spend your life working for children, working with families, and to have that kind of overnight ripped away from you because you've led this school for more than a decade of very successfully, suddenly be labelled as failing. You know, your personal and your professional reputation is effectively being destroyed by somebody who's coming in and kind of saying that you haven't got a piece of paper, or there's a few pieces of paper. Now, I'm not saying that that's acceptable, but you know, how somebody internalizes that and the ultimate failure of, you know, the responsibility of being the head teacher, the most important person in that building, and get, you know, being seen as failing in that respect is going to have a huge psychological impact. You know, certainly when you've gone from the top and being from outstanding school to then being kind of, you know, inadequate is extremely traumatic. And we don't know what was going on for that person in particular in their personal life at the time. But it's certainly going to be a public humiliation, because that's what Ofsted is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
because
public information. And you know, and you know, and then you know, what kind of self-doubt can you have? You know, have I been doing this wrong my whole life? You know, have I been, you know, yeah, how many different people have you let down? You know, like, you know, that label of being inadequate is you know, in the eyes of Ofsted and anybody who reads an Ofsted report
yeah,
is the worst category to fall in.
yeah, what's quite surprising is Ofsted. It's how hard it is to believe that Ofsted didn't understand the impact of what they do can have effect on a teacher or on a head teacher. It's like, if we can all collectively understand that a teacher's job is stressful as it is, looking after children, making sure they're achieving their best, almost like we said, they're almost trying to be a parent to these children, to then label them inadequate. How did Ofsted not understand that relationship that a head teacher or any teacher has with schools and to their students? How did that not even come across their mind? I don't understand.
You know what? I personally believe that, look, until the worst happens, Taj, we don't know how bad things are. Right? We don't know how bad things can get until the worst thing happens. Whether that be in a classroom in this kind of a setting where a teacher, you know, takes their own life because of the devastation of inadequate labelling, for safeguarding policy, or in other contexts. You know, our whole life and our ability to fly on airplanes has changed in, you know, not too kind of great a distance of time because of one incident. Yeah, you know how we get onto planes, what we can carry onto planes, that has changed because of the worst case scenario, right? So it's only when a worst case scenario occurs do we kind of get self-reflective and we go, are we doing this right? And I think Ofsted has moved. I think Ofsted has had to move as a result of this happening. Ofsted has kind of gone, hang on, we don't want this happening. Like, is this how bad it is? Because they don't know.
Yeah.
Like, and many Ofsted inspectors are former teachers. Yeah. So it's kind of worse.
Yeah, that's the point.
Judged, when you're being judged as inadequate by your peers and people who did your job, it's devastating.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point I was trying to make. It's hard to believe, because one of the questions was going to be, who are these group of people who are part of the Ofsted report, and you just answered that are former teachers. So for them not to understand how the impact it can have on an individual, it is quite surprising, and it hurts even more to be like, you know, you should understand this, the pressures and the stresses of what a teacher goes through, and then to label them like this, it is going to have an impact. But obviously, none of this ever happened before, so they probably didn't think it was going to happen. But that's still not an excuse to do that. It's just hard to believe. And that comes again to the point of the stresses that are placed on teachers. I mean, that's just one of those extra things. Like we talked about, obviously, the workloads at 9 to 5 or beyond 9 to 5, the students' behavior in the class, and now Ofsted. You have all these factors just, you know, being put on your heads, and it doesn't seem like it's a good look, or anyone's taking responsibility to be like, no, we shouldn't be doing this. Teachers need more support, or even bring light to what happens in the background as teachers. It's a shame that it took this for this to happen, for even it to be talked about. It's just amazing.
Yeah, and there's another part to this maybe that might be a factor, and again, I'm really conscious of not wanting to kind of theorize too much.
Yeah, of course.
Because we just don't know. We just don't know. But obviously, there's the personal responsibility element, i.e., as the head teacher, the buck stops with you. It's your name on the report. It's you who's publicly identified as failing. You're not the deputy. You're not the admin staff. It's you. So yes, it might be. Yeah. If this is all kind of down to kind of bureaucracy and administration, you don't. Of course, you might not cross every T and dot every I, but you're the one whose signature goes at the bottom, right?
Yeah.
So it's not your deputy, it's not your admin staff, it's on you. You can't blame others. You can't just say it's paperwork because it sounds dismissive. You can't be unprofessional and go, that person was supposed to do that part. You can't share the burden, and it's you. You're carrying it alone. So I think that kind of gives some context. But I think there's another factor, and I think there's that, after you've had your Ofsted inspection, the report takes a while.
Yeah.
It in this particular case, and again, from what I remember, this particular case took much longer than it usually does. So the report took maybe 3 or 4 months from what I can remember. And in that waiting period, you can't prepare everybody because the information, the actual result is confidential, so you can't actually announce it. You're going to work every day knowing that the kind of is that what's kind of coming. You're having to face parents and staff and governors who don't know what's going on yet, and you can't tell them anything. You've got to pretend everything's fine. You've got to go from being outstanding to kind of finding having to make an announcement of inadequacy in the eyes of Ofsted. So to go through months of this psychological kind of internal torture, it's and I think that's one of the things that's changed. Basically, I think that waiting period no longer exists. I think, from what I know, Ofsted have changed those procedures because I think that was deemed to have been a significant factor.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard they're going to, like I said, I haven't read much beyond what I know so far, is the one-word grading system of outstanding and inadequate is probably going to be reviewed and changed. But again, I believe it's still ongoing and changing. I'm not quite sure. But it's a shame that this had to happen for this to actually even be reviewed, which was quite sad. But again, this is more to understand the stresses teachers are facing on a daily basis. It just adds another thing that you guys need to worry about, and parents should understand what's going on in the school environment, because again, I don't think many parents understand how difficult it is in a school environment for teachers, and that's what obviously this talk was mainly about. Moving on to the stresses, now going on to, I want to talk a bit more about parents, and obviously you being a parent as well, your point of view will be very valuable, and the fact that you've kind of worked in a private and public school. Every parent discusses the values of private and public schools. What's your opinion on them? Because as parents, we all want the best for our kids, and at some point we've all kind of thought or wished that we could take our kids to private school. Do you think parents should be considering that, or if they have the means to do it, or are they overthinking it? What's the situation with private and public schools? Because I can tell you now, with every parent I've spoken to, we've had this discussion, and the conclusion we come to is, if you can afford it, do it. If you can't, then obviously try to supplement your kids with extra education, or try to kind of do the 11 plus, I think that's what it's called, to get them into grammar school. But then you're already setting up stresses for parents to be like, okay, I need to overeducate my kid or get tuition in place now and try to get them to pass the 11 plus, and it puts unnecessary stress on the kids. So there's so much that happens in the background from a parent's perspective regarding this conversation around private and public schools. What's your opinion on that?
Okay, let's go with my opinion and kind of action to go with my personal opinion. I have 2 daughters. They went to nursery, from the age of 3.5, or at normal nursery age, full-time nursery age. So they didn't do the part-time nursery thing. They went into full-time nursery as soon as they were old enough to receive full-time nursery education, as dictated by policy. I really loved the nursery they went to. I was really happy for them to go there. But I did pull them out of nursery earlier than the nursery would have liked, much to their financial dismay, as a result of choosing to put them in a international school. I am of kind of mixed Caribbean, African, English descent. My wife is of kind of Kurdish, Iraqi descent. Yet we chose to send them to an international school where they were doing their learning in another language from as soon as they started, and that was at 5 years old. So I pulled them out of. So they didn't do reception in an English school system. They did something known as infantil, which is kind of the equivalent of a reception at a Spanish school. And my reasoning and our reasoning for doing that was bilingualism and the importance of it. In my experience as a teacher, I had taught children from pretty much every part of the world, being from West London and all. And one of the most common denominators of a child's ability to be successful in education and to enjoy education and to do well in education, from a first-hand perspective of my experience, was bilingualism. Children who spoke more than one language just had the ability to pick up new concepts and understand things quicker than those who only spoke one language. It was as simple as that. My wife is bilingual, although her mother tongue, kind of the language she spoke from childhood, is kind of now her second language as opposed to her first, because when she came to England, it was far more important for her parents to assimilate her and get her to speak good English than speaking Kurdish. Therefore, English is her first language, and as a result, she didn't have the confidence to speak Kurdish well enough to our daughters for her to believe that that was something worth doing. Therefore, with me not speaking a second language, because the only language ever spoken in my household was the only language that my parents spoke, which was English. So I had to manipulate a situation and create a situation where I could create bilingual children, and I chose to do that in their education, which is really left field. It's really experimentational. Certainly with my children, I don't speak the language fluently. Over the last years, I've kind of become better and better in that language. But my children's ability to speak, write, read in Spanish is significantly better than mine, because they are immersed in education system. The Spanish school is a government school. It's not a private school, although it is very much seen as a private school in the eyes of the government. For example, they've just decided to put that VAT on top. Because myself and my wife are not Spanish, we don't have Spanish passports. Therefore, we do need to pay fees. They are not they're not comparable to your average private school. So they are not anywhere near as dear as they would be if they were going to an English private school. My children are learning the International Baccalaureate system, which is kind of not the same system as they would have learned if they were in an English school or even a private school or a grammar school. And my personal opinion is that you need to create a situation that you believe is most conducive to what you believe the needs of your child are. My experience was bilingualism was just going to open. The reality is there, the research is there, the kind of the data is there. If you can speak and think in more than one language, then your ability to pick up new concepts is a lot easier because there are more neural pathways open. That's the reality of bilingualism or trilingualism, et cetera, et cetera. Because I wasn't in a position to create that, I chose to use education to do that. So that's my personal experience. That's how I've chosen to do it. So financial burden that goes with that isn't the most extreme, as I've said. I have worked in the private education system. I have differing opinions on kind of whether that is necessarily the key to success. What I do believe a private education provides is generally smaller class sizes, which just by the numbers alone means that your child is going to get more attention.
Yeah.
If you're in a private school, in most cases, private schools tend to have classes that range from 15 to 20 children, not 30 children like in a state school or an academy. So I think in that respect, you're already at an advantage because your child's getting more attention, more support. I think private schools are generally better resourced, financed. They are a lot more flexible in terms of kind of giving families and the ability to do things that the state school system might not be able to, whether that be in terms of excursions, whether that be access to certain playing fields or different sports that kind of other kind of state schools and academies can't afford. So I think that, opportunities there are greater opportunities in the private education system just because of the kind of the access to funds that state schools or academies don't necessarily have. Does that necessarily make the education better? I have varying opinions on that. I've seen very good teaching in the private education system. I've also seen very average at best teaching in those same systems that you're paying lots of money for. And actually a lot of children who are kind of part of the education system, the private education system, are still having tutoring outside of school. So is it the teaching that necessarily is the teaching necessarily better? I wouldn't say it definitely is.
So it's more of the social advantages that they get at private schools there.
Absolutely, yes. It's the social advantages, it's the economic advantages, it's the contacts. It's who your children are interacting with, who you're interacting with, what opportunities that presents you with as a parent, what kind of exposure that's giving your children to that might boost their kind of incentives to learn, because they're seeing, even if you're not from that socioeconomic background and you're doing everything you can to get them into that school, or you've managed to get a bursary or whatever, if your children are around other young people who are going skiing and flying off here and there, your children are going to kind of see that. They're going to want the same for themselves. And even if it's not something that's kind of accessible to them, there is always the possibility that might trigger something in them to kind of go, all right, well, maybe I'm in this environment because my parents have managed to help me get here, but if I want this for me and if I want this for my children, this is what I may need to do.
Yeah, so it's almost like a drive. It's a drive that, to be
absolutely
successful because of my environment. Like you said before, the environment will kind of, dictate who you are.
Yeah.
So if you're in that.
Yeah, and absolutely. And it's not like private schools don't give bursaries or you can't kind of explore them yourself, whether that be through candid charities, whether that be, from philanthropists who there are a number of them, and organizations and foundations who will pay for your child's private education if you can demonstrate that your child needs it and you don't have the means. So but again, that requires some work. And that's kind of, I say some work like it's not a lot, a great deal of work to get your children into that environment if you don't have the funds to do so. You're going to have that drive to actually get them the place that you believe they deserve, which every parent should do. I genuinely believe that, nobody's going to fight for your child like you will.
Yeah, of
and
course.
If you don't fight for them, nobody else is going to.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably one of the reasons why I said, every parent, probably has this discussion. Should I, even if it breaks them, should I send my kid to private school or not? And I think the reason why I'm asking you is to explain the benefits of, private, what else should they be considering? And not just like, yeah, I want to send my kid to private school because of the academics. It's also what else they get, all the opportunities they will get by getting them to private school. So almost kind of justifying that private school option, because there are some people, like you said, they will fight for their kids to be there, but they need to understand why are they sending them to private school. What are you trying to gain? Like you said, yours was to kind of get multilingualism in the family, and obviously that will kind of benefit them in the long term. Being a teacher, that, but most parents don't know that. Having more than one language, being good at it will be better for you. I know that, but most parents probably don't. I mean, I've come from a bilingual family as well, so having to speak two languages, especially when I go home, is very beneficial. And obviously I've seen my kids and other members of my family who don't speak. They just stick to English, and then they struggle when they go on holiday, or they don't want to go on holiday back home because they don't speak the language and they don't quite feel they fit in. But that's another topic. So the other question I wanted to ask was, there is a massive financial kind of demand on parents. Is there any kind of like benefit to kind of say, if they go to primary school in a public and then private later on, kind of to weigh up where they put their cost in, so they'll save it now and then put it in later? Is that something they should consider? Because I've heard this argument, like if they're in private school at primary, it's better to keep them going through private in secondary, because you're taking them out of an environment which is private school environment. They've got certain access to certain things, then plucking them out because you can no longer afford it, then putting them into a public secondary school. They're not going to fit in anymore. They're so used to a certain way of system. And then also doing it vice versa. If they go to a public school at primary, you parents can able to save up for the 5-6 years they're in primary school, then maybe get their kids, obviously if they don't pass the 11 plus to get into grammar, they can then just pay for the secondary school. Is there any benefits or not? Should they even be considering doing something like that? It's something I've been thinking about, and the reason why I'm thinking about it, and me being honest, is if my daughter goes to public school now, she is getting tutoring outside, so I'm not worried about her academically, but she doesn't need any of the social benefits that come with going to private school yet. She's too young, but I understand the benefits of being in private school at an older age, secondary school, because that's when you're starting to develop those connections and your peers. You're not facing the same kind of troubles as you would in a secondary public school, i.e. the bullying aspect of things. Bullying in private school, I'm assuming, is a much different than bullying in a public school. Most parents and most kids in a private school are there to study. They put considerable financial resources into achieving. I don't think they're there to mess about and bully other kids. Don't get me wrong, bullying happens everywhere, even happens in the work environment as you get older. But bullying in school is considerably different to bullying, in the work environment or just generally outside. So primary school, I don't expect there to be much bullying. They're too young. There are some, don't get me wrong, but not everyone's kind of doing that. But secondary school, there is, to put them in a safer environment from my point of view, because it's not so much as an academic, but it's more of a safer environment. And then obviously everything else is secondary, building those social connections, because they'll be more beneficial at an older age as opposed to a younger age. I hope that makes sense. That's where my thinking comes from. So there's not only the social connection she'll make as she's older, because there's no need for that now, but there's also the safety aspect of, because every parent and every child is there knowing they're there in private school for a reason, to collectively achieve. So they ain't got time to be messing about and, doing silly things. They're all there to achieve. So which will have a good benefit on my child when she goes older and goes into private school secondary, if I have that option, as opposed to doing it from primary to secondary.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. I'm not going to pretend like I have an answer to whether I think it's financially, tactically, strategically viable to do one thing and then do the other before or after. I.e., go to a state school for primary and then kind of look at kind of ramping things up in preparation for secondary school. Then looking at private or 11 plus kind of options to then go to grammar. I don't, again, from my personal experience, one of the reasons why we chose the school we chose is because it's one building. My children have been there since infantile, and they'll go straight to university if that's something they choose to do, because the school that we've chosen to send them to has that run through, and that's one of the reasons why we chose it. There are, I have some strong opinions about that whole transition from primary to secondary. I also have some opinions about the fact that 11 plus isn't accessible for all children, and that there aren't grammar schools necessarily accessible to children in London in particular. But then this I don't want to make my answer London centric, even if that's where I reside and where my children go to school. However, from last statistics that I can recall, 93% of kids are in kind of state schools and just 7% attending public schools. Whereas actually the private school education system is heavily overrepresented in positions of power and influence and high earning careers. Right. So just with that data alone, I'll let people draw their own conclusions as to what they want and what they prioritize and how they find a way to facilitate that opportunity if they think that's what they want for their children. The truth of the matter is that there's a case for and against private education. Like I said, it's parental choice. Effectively, it's freedom. It's smaller class sizes, it's better resources, it's academic results, it's extracurricular opportunities, it's teacher quality and retention is significantly higher in private education. And one of the reasons for that is because the better salaries, it attracts specialist teachers, etc., lower staff turnover. But then also like the discipline and the standards are generally generally believed to be higher in a private education system, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's this other argument about it taking pressure off the state system. But then that's where we can cross that boundary now and kind of go, all right, but if only 7% of kids are in the private education system, what effectively you're taking that 7% away from the state, which actually means that state is getting 7% less money. And then if you're choosing to then kind of pull them out of that when it gets to secondary school age, because you decide that's when things get important, then secondary schools are even kind of under more pressure financially, because then they've got kind of less of the kind of aspirational children or aspirational families. Therefore, all those things I've just mentioned kind of are less equipped. The secondary education system, secondary education system, or academic or the academy system lacks that funding. But then there's the case the other way around. Again, the private school is entrenched inequality. Wealth buying better education, better opportunities buys more wealth. So it perpetuates class divisions and two-tier systems, right? So things are based on your ability to pay, not your ability to learn, notwithstanding opportunities that I've already mentioned, that that there are funded opportunities available. Therefore draining teaching talent from the state sector, because you've got better teachers wanting to teach in the private schools because of the better salaries, better pay, better conditions, more job security. You've got that distortion of university access, because private school children are again kind of massively overrepresented at the top universities in this country. Is that because they're more talented, or is it just because they're better prepared and better coached because they've had this private education? So then we're looking again at privilege, not merit. And then other things like social segregation and exam factory pressure. And then there's loads of other things.
I mean, to be fair, I think that question came from me, to be fair, personally, as a parent, as opposed to a general thing, because I think every parent is, or especially when they have kids, will go through that. As I said, with a number of my parents, we've had this conversation. If we can, would we have these debates? But then asking an actual teacher who's been there, it's just.
Right. So on a personal level, maybe this isn't for the podcast, maybe you'll choose to find a way to edit this in, but I'll give you a really kind of blunt kind of answer, Taj, and ask you to ask yourself these things, right? You're considering, or anybody will consider giving their children the best opportunities,
Exactly, yeah.
right? But the truth of the matter is, when it comes to jobs and opportunities, do people like us get those same opportunities, right? Because the truth is, in the workplace, talented people get excluded, for being from the wrong background, which stifles social mobility. So there is that old boys network type of thing that means that even if you choose to put your child through the education system, the truth of the matter is their opportunities are not going to be exactly the same. That's the reality. That's the world that we know, Taj, and we can be, we can go down a different route with it and be a little bit more, we can be more idealistic. But in my experience, and from somebody who has a kind of a wife who's working very high profile in a very high profile environment, there are people in her line of work who certainly haven't done the work that she's had to do to get to where she is, but because of who they are and where they came from, they've had these opportunities that she would have never got.
Yeah.
So that's life experience, and I think the education system can be responsible for the kind of proliferating that. And then it's the questionable value of the thing. Touch the truth. Does 40k of your money a year actually buy better education, or is it buying better connections?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because the studies behind how much a private school gives an advantage is actually compared with something like parental background. The same child in a state school with very engaged parents has and is proven to be able to do just as well, if not better, without the private school education. So how could that 40k be better used? How much more work have you or I got to go and do to pay for that 40k a year school that's actually taken us away from things that we could do with that 40k that actually might be better than. It's a tough one.
Oh yeah,
it's just a personal choice.
I mean, like I said, I would like this obviously to be public, this information to be public, because it's not just me. That question came from a personal place, but I know it's every parent is thinking about what even if the ones that have never been thinking about it, they will think about it at one point. They will come across it, private versus public, and obviously if they have that as much information as they can, they can make informed decisions. So it's not just for me, but it came from personal space, because that's what was going through my mind right now. Me, my friends, my family, we're thinking about it, we're considering it, and even if it means saving up and doing it later, it's it's in our minds right now. So if other people are in the same position, you've given them some information to think about. So it's not just going to be for me, but it's going to be for everyone. How much do you know about Katherine Birbalsingh from Michaela Community School? She's also known as the strictest head teacher. Do you know much about her?
Sorry, Katherine, remind me of her name?
Katherine Birbalsingh from Michaela Community School.
Yeah.
You must have heard of her.
Yes, of course I have.
Briefly, what do you know of her, and what do you think of her methods of being like the strictest, or labeled as the strictest head teacher?
Okay.
I mean, it can be brief. I mean, obviously, I don't know how much you know of her. Even myself, I've just kind of seen most of her stuff on YouTube, social media, her talks, and I find them fascinating.
Yeah. I kind of have, I'm not a big user of social media. In fact, I very, very, very rarely use it. So I kind of picked up bits and pieces when people send me stuff directly, as opposed to me seeing stuff through scrolling. However, she is still, and her approaches have very much been on my radar. Right, let me have a good think about this. I need to wrap as well imminently.
No worries. I mean, these are the last of my questions. Really, it's more about her and her approach and her intentions. So I mean, I can wrap up the whole question in one, really.
I tell you what, I'm going to summarize it.
Yeah.
I think structure might actually really, I think real rigorous structure can really help disadvantaged children by providing a level of like stability, routine, clear expectations, high standards, and those things that they don't necessarily get at home. Yeah. So the kind of no excuses approach, which I believe is this philosophy, right?
Yeah.
It removes kind of home circumstances as a limiting factor, because within that system, every child's held to the same standard regardless of that background. Yeah. However, my concern with that is that whole strict discipline kind of authoritarian kind of way of doing things doesn't address trauma. Yeah. In my experience. Yeah. So do all children thrive under rigid systems? No, absolutely not. Yeah, there was this old approach of, send them to the army back in the day, back in my parents' day, right? If you were a naughty kid, you'd be, sent to cadets or the army, and you'll be in a real disciplinarian kind of environment, and that would fix you. But it didn't work for many, many people. So I think that with the modern kind of thinking, there are children who require some flexibility and therapeutic kind of nurturing and support, and some differentiated approaches. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. And my response to that would be, so she's been around since 2014, and up until now, her rigid system kind of works, and that shows in how the school is achieving, or how the students are achieving in their grades, and the school itself being outstanding. So clearly that system is working, and clearly parents are sending their kids there because they want that. So, and she's achieving it by being in this rigid. So she's not only holding students accountable, she's also put this rigid system in that everybody follows it. And she's also holding parents accountable as well, which is what we were talking about earlier. Obviously, we understand it's certain circumstances, but she's saying no excuses. That's almost her kind of structure of doing this. There's no excuses. If you want the best for your kids, like you said before, we would go out of our way to kind of make sure we have the best for our kids. And she's now holding everyone up to those standards. If you want that best for your kids, not only does the system itself need to be the best and be very rigid in terms of what it's doing and be unbendable, but also the parents need to take responsibility. So if the school is trying to achieve something, the parents need to go along. That consistency that we were talking about before. If something different is going on at home and something different is going on in school, there's going to be issues. So she's almost doing what most teachers are talking about in terms of the issues that we have, like in terms of the stresses, to students misbehaving. Is there support at home? What's going on at home? She's almost addressing that situation, and this almost seems like a backlash. So isn't that system, shouldn't that be kind of widely adopted? Like, she's been around since 2014. If it was a system that didn't work and parents had an issue with it, it would have fallen apart a long time ago.
But there in your statement, I think you've answered the question, right? Like, you've not just got a situation where this Michaela school kind of philosophy has just appeared. It's been out there for a little while, right? It's working, and we've seen it working for a while. But actually, why is it working? It's working because everybody's on the same page.
Yeah.
It's working because when a parent decides this is the approach for you and this is the way it's going to work, you've got the buy-in already. So everybody's on the same page. When you send your child to that school, whatever the school say, I am supporting this, right? And as a result, that's why it works. That's the truth.
Yeah.
It's not any more complicated than that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Right. Here's the challenge, though, right? it absolutely works for the children who are a part of that system. But of course it works for the children who are part of those systems because they've got no choice. Your parents have chosen to send you there. This is what I expect of you. I'm going to back the school because this is the approach that the school take, and I'm behind this, and that's where you are going, right? Here's the challenge, though, yeah? And here's my nuanced kind of position, right? Some children need this structure, some need flexibility. Some need boundaries, others need understanding. The best schools find a way to do both, right? Most schools are dealing with children who are kind of somewhere within that journey, right? They're not just starting school, yeah? They've got, limited resources for the wraparound support that I've spoken about already for the most disadvantaged children. They're struggling to, handle competing priorities, right? And I think that kind of Michaela approach can be kind of very selective about that fit, i.e., you are buying into this, yeah? Therefore, this is what you're going to do, and you're going to support it. Whereas I think that most state schools kind of don't get to choose, right? They just take whoever turns up at the door.
I believe a Michaela Community School is a state school, I believe. It's not a private school.
Yeah, I think that they can be a bit more selective about their fit.
Okay.
Than state schools can. But that's my interpretation from what I know.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, to be fair, that was the final question really, is what your thoughts were on that kind of system, and why teachers aren't really adopting it considering it works, but you've answered it. It's not as nuanced as simple as just having a rigid system and everyone following along.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, I think you've answered all my questions that I had about teaching and what parents should know and what information they need to get out to parents and what's important to know, mostly the stresses. I think that was the most important thing, and understand what you guys do. To wrap it up, is there anything else that I've probably missed, or as a parent I should know, any information you think teachers should kind of be telling their parents, or even their students? Is there a better way of doing something, or something needs to improve? Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of just I'd like to end on an anecdote. Yeah. Look, I remember a student, yeah, let's call him John. Yeah. He was a bright, quick kid. He asked really great questions, but he never, ever did any kind of work that I sent home for him. I was never a fan of homework, by the way. In fact, I kind of very much worked against some of the schools that I taught in with regards to kind of their homework policies, and I didn't offer punitive kids didn't have to stay for break time if they didn't do their homework. There wasn't a punishment if they got less spellings right. I just didn't think that was fair based on my experience, and like I said, things that I'd witnessed in my own education and education of others. I kind of did things my own way, and always did, and it didn't always make me particularly popular with the senior leadership who want everybody off the same page. Yeah. However, yeah, I'm responsible for that child, so I would I'll take it on the chin. Yeah. Anyway, I digress. Yeah. So this kid, John, never did any kind of work that I sent home, but I never had a problem with that. Yeah. So I personally wasn't kind of frustrated by it. But it was important to me to find out kind of what was going on for him. And I came on to learn that he was obviously a carer for his younger sibling, or siblings rather, and his mum worked night shifts. And within that, kind of it came out, and kind of because of that compassion I showed towards him, it became obvious to me, or it became known to me that, he didn't have a desk to work on, no quiet space. He was obviously having to prepare dinner for himself and his kids. And this is a primary school age child. So it wasn't that he was lazy. It wasn't that he couldn't do the work. It was just he was exhausted. And the system that kind of he was working within, and the policy of the school that he was working in, expected him to compete with other children, who some of which had tutors, some had their own bedrooms, some had their parents constantly checking and doing planners and all those things. And the truth of the matter is anecdotally, that was a real life situation for me, and it was the reality for a lot more children than I think people realize. So yeah, as a teacher, it's about being compassionate towards that child and just doing the best you can to see them for who they are and what their life is like, and best supporting that in a way that they've got no choice in their life. They're children. So my job as a teacher was always to kind of see them for who they were and celebrate the things that they did. And being a carer for younger sibling is a huge thing, and gave John some real life skills that I think are going to make him an extremely successful adult.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Kris. It was nice talking to you, and hopefully we can catch up again if I have any more questions. I'm sure we will, about the education system, as things are always changing.
Yeah. Anytime, buddy.
Again, it was nice speaking to you, Kris. Thank you.
All right. Nice speaking to you too.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers, John. Bye.